The actions took place in Africa, or rather in the territory of military operations. It was day now and the sun was high. Armed soldiers were hiding behind large rocks and they had weapons in their hands. They were scouting information about their opponents, and one of these armed soldiers said that these guys were from the opposition. Where did they get their weapons? Apparently, the situation now was not the best. One of the soldiers reported that 3 people were wounded. Another soldier asked if they really should retreat. But then a guy came and said firmly that no, because he himself would go to investigate. Which of the armed soldiers asked if it was really the commander? He was the captain of the 5th detachment of the 1st Foreign Legion, the military corps of a certain country, and his name is Hasumi Ryuji. After that, their captain himself went to investigate. He was hiding behind a stone. Now he was scouting the situation, carefully studying his enemy. Ryuji noticed and thought that the 3 of them were in the shadows right now, and another one is hiding behind a tree. He made a quick decision and decided to go around and suddenly attack them. The opponents did not expect this in any way, and that's why their captain's plan went very well. Ryuji immediately attacked them. First, he immobilized one by hitting him on the head with his fist. After that, the same fate reached the other. One of the opponents got scared and apparently decided to run away. But it didn't work out either. Ryuji attacked him from behind and slammed his face into the ground. The remaining, armed opponent wanted to shoot Ryuji, but he didn't succeed either. Ryuji was faster and more agile than him. He took out a gun and shot him. The bullet hit him right in the forehead. And after just a few seconds, a squad of 4 opponents was defeated. Ryuji alone was able to overcome them. After successfully completing the task, Ryuji reported by radio that all targets had been captured and announced the end of communication. After all this, Ryuji's squad tied the 3 captives to a tree. All this time, when they had already regained consciousness, these 3 enemies were muttering something in their own language. But Ryuji knew their language, and therefore easily communicated with one of them. Then the commander was informed that all the remaining ones had been destroyed. Hasumi said it was fine. And he informed his subordinates that their base was deeper in the forest. So before the end of the day, they will go exploring. All his subordinates accepted the order. After all this, when they scouted the information they needed, they immediately went in search of their base. One of Hasumi's subordinates told his commander that, as always, he was simply incredible. To which the commander replied that he was praising him early. His soldier said he was a hero who wasn't afraid of death. His skills are simply excellent. Besides, he's a genius. When did he manage to learn the local language? The commander did not answer anything. One of the soldiers said that, and he thought the Japanese were peace-loving idiots. However, the commander is completely different. It's not for nothing that he is called the strongest. Then the commander stopped and told him that he was wrong about something. The soldier asked what was in what. The commander said he was afraid of death, just like them. He just realized that he would survive if he attacked first. Here the commander stopped abruptly. The soldiers became worried and called out to him. There was a strange fog everywhere. After a long silence, Ryuji told his soldiers that the enemy base would soon appear, so everyone should be on the alert. But Ryuji looked very puzzled, because it was really very strange. He asked what the hell, and thought, is it really fog? In Africa, it's not a poisonous gas. But what the hell is this? He found himself in some strange, spacious cave, and looking around, he thought, where is he? Was this cave somewhere nearby? He needs a map. Then a system window appeared in front of him, and the system greeted the system. She called him a hero from another world. Hasumi was confused and asked, who is this? Is this a man from the opposition? But then he felt his pants, realized that he didn't have a gun and the rest of the weapons were gone too. He took out his knife and thought that he was the only one left. The system apparently read him perfectly and told him not to be so careful. She's his virtual assistant. First he has to look at his status window. His status window was displayed in front of him. He is attentive. He examined it and thought, what is this? All its characteristics were indicated in this status window. His name and race were indicated. His profession was a soldier. His level was 2. His style was close combat from level 79. Health was 318 out of 336. Mana was 34 out of 36. His condition was normal. Hasumi thought, is there really no information about him? Where did she come from here? He grabbed his head and asked if he had hit his head and gone crazy. But the system told him he was wrong. Is this a normal phenomenon here? Isn't it like playing games in his world? Hasumi said he didn't know. The virtual assistant was surprised by his answer, and that's why he was silent for a moment. He didn't actually play computer games. He couldn't just afford it. The system was clearly confused. She asked him if he knew anything about rebirth in other worlds. Hasumi became even more serious and said no. by asking what it is. The system hesitated and said that well, he understood his situation. But then Ryuji heard some sounds and thought, are they really people? The system told him that then he would do everything in order for him. But Hasumi interrupted him and told him to shut up. The virtual assistant really didn't say another word. The commander stood on the mountainside and looked down. He began to look closely, because he needed to find out what was going on there. These were people who, apparently, also used magic. They were talking to each other in their language, and at first it might seem that it was the same language spoken by those people who were then tied to a tree by Ryuji and his soldiers. But still, Ryuji caught the differences between these languages. He thought that the language was not like the dialect of those locals from the opposition. He also saw their status windows and magic. It occurred to him that this was another world. He carefully began to observe the actions of these strange people, and then he realized that their actions were not giving any result. These people were using their magic to fight a huge lizard, but their actions really did not bring any result. Ryuji continued to closely monitor their attacks and thought that direct attacks did not cause any damage. These magicians, and so everyone understood it. One of them, wiping sweat from his chin, thought that, but before that they had slain many strong monsters. Maybe they should retreat before the magic runs out. However, they have already lost several. Ryuji, apparently, could no longer stand aside, and therefore called out to them. He went down to them and asked why they didn't attack him in the stomach. The men were very surprised and asked where he came from here at all. Ryuji said it didn't matter, and he himself thought that their language resembled a mixture of Spanish and Portuguese, and he also hears features of French. He thinks he can talk to them. After that, he said that if they get close to him and hit him in the stomach, they will easily defeat him. And she asked why they wouldn't do that. The magician asked him what else he was asking. It is extremely dangerous to approach these monsters, and besides, because of the use of magic, their health is almost at zero. Ryuji asked that, meaning they would soon exhaust their strength, wouldn't they? The magician could not stand it and, going up to him and starting to poke at him with his finger, shouted that since it had already reached him, then maybe he would help them already. If he turned out to be the one, then it means that he is also a mercenary. Ryuji remained as calm as ever and didn't even change his face and said that he understood. The magician was surprised and asked what. The other magicians, who all continued to restrain this huge reptile with their magic, were already barely holding on. Their strength was running out. One of them said he couldn't do it anymore. Then Ryuji came to their aid just the same. They looked at him and asked if he was level 2. How did he even get this far? Ryuji didn't pay any attention to his words at all. He thought that although it didn't matter at all, he came closer to this monster. This huge monster growled at him and apparently was going to attack him. But Ryuji was no longer at this place. He pushed off with his foot from this monster and flew up. He thought that in order to avoid poisoning, you need to go from the back. This monster didn't even have time to understand anything, much less react. He carefully watched his tail and thought that the tail strike would be stronger than he had calculated. However, at the moment when the monster was about to hit him with its tail, although it almost touched him, Ryuji instantly moved to another place, and he thought it was okay if he got hit. He attacked the monster and flew away himself, and he said that this monster is finished. The magician was watching him very closely and was at a loss. He didn't expect him to be able to do that. He stared at him with his mouth agape. Ryuji, despite the strong blow, landed neatly on the ground, after which he pushed off from her again by force and rushed to this monster. At that moment, Ryuji thought that he needed to hang it out and force it to open. And it needs to be done right now. His weak spot is his stomach. He took out his knife and plunged it right into the belly of this monster. The monster growled, then collapsed. The magicians did not expect this in any way. One of them shouted that did he really kill the monster with just a knife? Another said it couldn't be, and another asked him who is he? To which Ryuji replied that he was an ordinary soldier. The monster was defeated. After that, this lizard turned into dust and disappeared, and one gold coin fell out of it. Ryuji reached for it and picked it up. In his hands, he began to twist it and examine it. He asked what is this? The virtual assistant informed him that he had raised his level, and his health indicators have also increased, and mana indicators too. The virtual assistant showed him his characteristics again. Now his level was 3. Health was 334 and out of 354. Mana was 39 out of 41. Ryuji studied all this carefully and thought that it was also true. The numbers on the panel have changed. Then a magician with blonde hair came up to him from behind and, calling out to him, said that yes, he was their savior. Ryuji turned to him and said that it wasn't difficult. The magician asked him that only who was he anyway. He introduced himself to the soldiers, but his uniform His uniform doesn't look like the uniform of a royal soldier. Ryuji said that he was the captain of the 5th Corps of the Foreign Legion. He thought that even if he told them the truth, it seemed that he would not understand it at all. After which he said that it was very difficult to explain. But saving people is his specialty. The magician smiled at him and said that it didn't matter. After all, he is strong, which is why he thinks he is not deceiving them, and suggested to him that he would like to go with them. But the other magicians were very hostile towards Ryuji, so they interrupted their friend and said they were against it. Another said he wasn't even an adventurer. He's just an outsider who suddenly appeared alone in the dungeon. It's just creepy. Then the magician with blonde hair asked them that then they would be able to get out of here by themselves. Hearing his question, the others hesitated and did not know what to answer, because they themselves understood perfectly well that it would be very difficult for them to get out, if they, of course, could do it. Then the magician with blonde hair decided to come in from the other side and calmly asked the others if there were still people here who were against this decision. If they are against it, then they can offer their own ideas. What is the best thing for them to do? But here again, no one could say anything. They understood that their friend was right, but they were afraid and did not trust Ryuji. Then this magician exhaled and said that it was wonderful, there were no objections. He turned to the captain and asked if he could get them out of this dungeon. Ryuji said no problem. After they resolved all the misunderstandings and disagreements, they set out on a journey for Ryuji. They met several more monsters and obstacles on the way, but thanks to Ryuji, everything went smoothly. Ryuji deftly and ruthlessly cleared the way for them. But the magicians also did not lag behind. They also tried to support Ryuji with their magic. And soon the magicians realized that they were wrong when they did not want to follow Ryuji and did not trust him. When the path was more or less free and there were no more battles, the magicians praised Ryuji and said that yes, he was just a monster. The fact that they met him here is just incredible luck. A little more and they could have died here. Ryuji asked, "Is this place really that dangerous?" To which the magician who was walking in front of him replied that his rank was twice lower than that of the monsters of this dungeon. Ryuji asked what rank. Hearing his question, the magicians who were walking behind him couldn't help but start mocking him and asked if he didn't know that either. The magician who was walking in front told the magician who started mocking Ryuji to better walk silently and not move. And he himself apologized to the captain for the trick of his comrade. Ryuji said that he somehow didn't care about it. He really didn't care, he didn't even change his face. Then the magician decided to start his explanation and said that the Adventurers Guild assigns a personal rank to each dungeon depending on the monsters that live inside. The lowest rank is E, then comes D, and then C, followed by B, and then N, finally S rank. There are also monsters of mythical and legendary rank, but they are very rare here. The lizard he defeated was from the rank. They are very rare here, but still. He hesitated a little and added, thereby ending his story, that somehow so. Ryuji listened to him attentively and thought that he didn't even know what a dungeon was. Apparently, this is the habitat of these dangerous creatures. Dangerous creatures are called monsters here, and when they die, they dissolve into dust. After their death, you can find some rare items. It seems that this is why adventurers protect these places. He took out the coin he picked up after that lizard and thought it might be one of them. The magician looked at this coin and asked what is it? And it must be a summoning weapon. Ryuji asked, isn't that money? The magician told him that it could not be used as money. Special items in the form of coins have various effects. The effect of conscription weapons. With this effect, a person can summon any weapon that he has used in the past. Ryuji said that's how it is. And this is really quite convenient. And asked if he could keep this coin for himself. The magician said that of course. After all, he killed that lizard, so the reward will be his. But even then, the magicians who were walking behind him could not ignore this situation and again began to mock and say that this was the cheapest thing that a monster could fall out at all. Ryuji stopped and squinted at that magician. Seeing his gaze, the magician was frightened, took a few steps back. But as they say, the best defense is an attack. And that's why the magician ran into Ryuji, asking what he was staring at. But Ryuji didn't focus on it, so he just turned around and continued on his way. And those magicians kept whispering behind his back. And one of them said that he was so creepy. Ryuji thought it was true. The adventurer, for the most part, is magicians and they don't need anything like that. Therefore, these coins are not particularly popular. However, for him this coin, she can be a trump card for him. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. However, another monster appeared on their way. Everyone immediately took up their fighting positions and understood without words what they needed to do. Ryuji naturally rushed forward. When Ryuji defeated this snake, the virtual assistant notified him that he had raised his level. and also his health and mana indicators were increased. Ryuji scratched his head and said how annoying he was. He already realized that he had raised his level. The magician looked at him carefully and asked if something was really wrong. Ryuji also said that the virtual assistant is always noisy and annoying to him. The magician did not understand what he was talking about and asked what the virtual assistant was. What is it? Ryuji said that yes, so he shouldn't take it into his head. And he himself thought that this is how it turns out that only he can hear this voice. And why is this so? The virtual assistant told him that he wanted to, and that's why he shouldn't bother with stupid questions. Better let him look ahead. He came out on a huge empty area. The magicians also decided to look around. And finally, each of them felt relieved. Now they were walking more relaxed. One of them said that very soon they would finally come to the exit. But then Ryuji heard something strange, and therefore shouted to them to be careful. From above, apparently the enemy was there. But the magicians did not take his words seriously. Everyone was already very tired and wanted to return home as soon as possible, so no one wanted to believe him. One of them was trudging along at all, as if he was walking separately from everyone at all, and looking at him asked what he's carrying. But he could not finish the last word, as a huge monster trampled him with its paw, leaving only a bloody mess from him. Another magician, who was also not so far away from him, he had already grabbed. Everyone else was very scared, and no one wanted to believe that it was true, because they were already so happy that they would soon get out of here. They said yes, they were just joking. What does a dragon do in a rank dungeon? The magicians were very scared, because no one was ready for this, and there was no way to prepare for this either. One of them, apparently, was caught in a strong panic. He could no longer be here. Therefore, without thinking about anything, I rushed straight to the exit. Ryuji was about to rush after him and shouted for him to stop. But this huge dragon, as if guessed the actions of this magician and blocked his way, standing right at the exit. And then he growled loudly. Fate played a cruel joke. The dragon, either on purpose, realizing what was happening here, or not, touched the exit with his tail, and then there was a collapse. The exit and entrance to the cave was blocked. Now the magicians began a real panic. Someone shouted that he had blocked the exit from the dungeon. What should they do now? The magician, who was walking ahead all the time, looked around and, apparently, I saw another tunnel on the hill, said that they still have a chance to get out of here. Someone asked him what and how he was going to do it. This magician said they needed to drive the dragon away from the exit. They should get ready to strike at his command. After that, all the magicians got into a fighting position, and the magician with blonde hair added that they should also beware of his direct attacks. But things didn't go as smoothly as we wanted. Magicians could not stand alone against such an enemy. All their attacks were worthless to the dragon. He didn't even seem to notice them. They only made him very angry. Seeing the angry dragon, the magician with blonde hair tensed up and said that it was bad. Ryuji asked, "What's his problem?" The magician turned to him. He said that he was going to attack them with a demonic roar. Everyone should stay away from him. Someone asked him if he was joking or something. Where should they run to? There really was nowhere to run. But the dragon had already let out its demonic roar. Those who did not have time to escape were already dead. All the magicians were very shaken. They understood that it was rubbish. Someone was already in a panic and said that they would all die here. Only Ryuji kept his composure and was calm. Apparently, he acted before that, as he closely monitored the behavior and attacks of the dragon. And most likely he was already hatching some kind of plan. He thought it was an incredible impact force. He noticed all the small details and thought that, as well as his skin, it was just incredibly durable. And in the end he made a verdict that this monster is the living embodiment of the tank. But since Ryuji was a military man, he also encountered tanks, which means that he knew how to resist them. And I thought that in order to destroy the tank, it was necessary to attack it from above. However, in the current situation, he doesn't think it will work on a dragon either. He thought about it and began to examine it carefully. Then he noticed something and thought that had the stone scratched his stomach. But in order to be sure of this, he needs to get closer to the dragon. After that, without saying a word, he decided to take a chance and went straight to this dragon. The magician called out to him and asked where he was going. Ryuji answered briefly and said that he was on a reconnaissance mission. He crept closer to the monster and decided to hide behind a stone. And after waiting for the right moment, he pulled out his knife and ran straight at the dragon. He swung his knife and was able to scratch his skin. The dragon howled in pain and decided to hit him. But Ryuji managed to dodge. One of the magicians, who was standing not far from Ryuji, glanced at him with displeasure and thought that this bully could not be defeated with one blow of his knife. But Ryuji did not want to defeat him with this blow, because he himself understood that it was impossible. but he was convinced of something and thought that it was as he thought. Magic attacks don't work on this dragon, but physical ones, if that's the case. But the course of his reasoning was interrupted by a magician who called out to him. Ryuji told him to help him defeat him. The magician asked him what and how he was going to do it. Another magician said that it was simply impossible. Another one, who was sitting next to him, said that he was completely out of fear or what. But that light magician looked at them menacingly, letting them understand that they should be silent. And they apparently understood his signal and stopped contradicting them. This magician turned to Ryuji and said that they were right this time, even though he is strong, however, to defeat the dragon. But Ryuji already knew what to do, which is why he interrupted him and said that he was not asking him to trust him. But they don't have many options, do they? The magician understood this well, after which he thought about it and said that he understood, and asked what he should do. A girl came up to him and asked if he was serious, to which the magician replied to her so that she would be silent either that way, or they would all die here. Ryuji told them not to worry, because they wouldn't have to do anything complicated, and he himself thought that they just needed to distract his attention for a while. After Ryuji gave the magicians a command, they all started shooting at the dragon with their magic, thereby distracting him. One of them shouted at this dragon to get it, calling her a stupid reptile. He asked the dragon, how is it for him? They took out all their anger on this dragon. The magicians kept attacking, and one of them asked where that kid had gone. He didn't leave them, did he? Ryuji himself was hiding nearby and thought that was great. They distracted him from it, and now it's time to use his trump card, which he received quite recently. Then he asked the magician that how do I activate this coin? To which the magician told him that he should squeeze her in his fist and imagine what he wants to see in her place. Then break the coin. Ryuji took out this coin and did exactly as the magician told him. After that, a rifle appeared in his hands. He took aim and thought that if you need to defeat a live tank, then only with this. It was a 12.7mm large caliber sniper rifle. Ryuji had already used it once in a training exercise. With this, you can instantly destroy the target. Everything will end with just one shot. He took aim and pulled the trigger, and he hit exactly the target. The dragon was defeated. The magicians were at a loss and said yes, how so? Is the dragon defeated? After all this, the dragon was really defeated. His body also dissolved and whole mountains of gold coins appeared. The magicians were not themselves with joy. They immediately rushed to the treasures and began to rake themselves out. The girl said that it was the first time she saw such a large number of items that fell from monsters. Meanwhile, while Ryuji was standing aside, the virtual assistant informed him that he had raised his level several times. Ryuji couldn't take it anymore and told his virtual assistant to be quiet already. He's already figured it out. Then he saw something in front of him, looking closely. He thought, is it really children's shoes? What did the child forget here? Then a magician came up to him and said that he was really incredibly cool. Now other magicians also began to support him and said that he really defeated him with one blow. He really is just something. He's really just incredible. And since they didn't even mind taking him into there. But right now Ryuji wasn't in the mood for fun with the others. He was very puzzled by his find. After all, really, where could children's shoes come from here? And that's why they were interrupted by Ryuji, who showed the children's shoes in his hands and asked, what is this shoe doing here? And besides, it's a child's size. One of the magicians said that, probably, this is the same child that they came here for. Ryuji became very serious and told him to tell him more about it. Then the magician began to tell him everything. He said that they had accepted a request from the guild to search for a missing child. However, during the mission, one member of their squad was kidnapped. Most likely, this child, like their ally, was abducted by goblins. Ryuji asked that is, they came here looking for a child from their comrade, didn't they? The magicians were silent for a while, after which one of them said no. They have already firmly decided that they do not intend to stay here anymore and are going to leave this dungeon. After all, it's not safe to stay here anymore. Ryuji didn't understand them at all and asked what about their friend and their mission. Would they just leave them here? One of the magicians could not stand it and began, apparently, fatigue and fear that he had recently experienced affected him. None of them intended to stay here anymore, shouting that did he really understand nothing. They're not as strong as he is. The magician with blonde hair, although he was very tired himself, but still tried to hold on, asked him to calm down already. He turned to Ryuji and said that he was unfortunately right. This would be a land full of monsters with higher rank D. Yes, he could see it himself with the example of this dragon. The dark-haired mage said it was probably the guild's fault. They haven't explored this dungeon properly. The magician with the blonde hair said it was most likely. And as for these goblins, they are very weak in themselves. However, in a group, they can become a big problem. They often take hostages and lure others into their lair. There must be their nest nearby. However, they will not be able to overcome them. Ryuji wanted to say something, but the magician interrupted him and said that, but there are two other reasons besides. The first reason is that their order is invalid if their rank is lower than that of the dungeon. To do this, they need to return to the guild and point out the dungeon rank error, and a higher rated group of adventurers will be sent there. And the second reason is that they met the missing member of the group after accepting the assignment. So they are connected only by business relations. Adventurers are not heroes and not brave, and in the first place is their own life and safety. Ryuji was clearly dissatisfied with this explanation, or maybe he was disappointed in them now, and said that's how it was. He understood him. The magician with blonde hair said that since he understood, then. But Ryuji was not going to sit idly by. He could not do nothing. And seeing that Ryuji was going somewhere, the magician stopped and asked him where he was going. Ryuji did not hide anything from him and directly told him that to the goblin nest. He said it had to be somewhere nearby, didn't he? The magician with blonde hair was at a loss and asked if he really wasn't listening to him at all. Ryuji said no, because he said he understood him. It is really worth avoiding reckless decisions in order to save your life. And he is naturally right. However, unlike him, he has no reason to back down. He approached the magicians who were raking coins and asked if there were any summoning weapons among this pile of coins. To which the magician replied that no, there is only money here. Ryuji asked, what is it like? Well, okay. After that, he turned around and without another word went in search of the goblin nest. The blonde-haired magician shouted at him to stop. But then I realized that it was useless and stopped, asked if this guy would seriously go there alone. Apparently, he was very worried about him, but the fear and understanding that he would be powerless against the monsters he would face prevented him from going after Ryuji. Ryuji walked on alone through this dark and long tunnel and thought that he was already close. He really was already very close to the nest. Already very close to him, 3 people were tied to a pole. Apparently these were the missing ones. There were 2 small children and a girl. The little children were very scared and that's why they started crying. The girl tried to calm them down and comfort them. She told them that they would definitely come for them so that they should not cry. Then these goblins, who were guarding their prey, felt the enemies. They had already grabbed their weapons and were ready to engage at any moment. Then Ryuji showed up and the goblins immediately attacked him. However, Ryuji was stronger than them and cut off one of their heads already. He was surrounded by a whole pack of goblins. Ryuji prepared for a fight and asked them who wants to die first? Let them come up. Ryuji abruptly and fearlessly rushed into battle with the goblins. In his hands he had only one knife, which he wielded very deftly and chopped off the goblin, then arms, then legs, then heads. In the blink of an eye, he went to the post to which 2 children and a girl were tied and cut the ropes, thereby freeing them. Ryuji stopped for a moment and asked the girl if she was injured. This girl did not answer his question, but only asked him who he was. Ryuji said that her friend told him about this place. The girl anxiously asked if they were all right. Ryuji said they would talk about it later. After all, they have to get out of here first. They must overcome this horde of monsters. After all, while they were talking, though not for long, they were already surrounded by a whole army of these goblins, and it was much more difficult to cope with the army. The girl said that she would have helped him, but her sword. Ryuji interrupted her and asked what the sword was. Where is he? The girl said she had no idea. When she was captured by these goblins, it seems they dragged him away somewhere. Ryuji said that well, there's nothing to be done about it. Then he'll sort it all out on his own. After that, he didn't say anything else, just rushed off to destroy the remaining goblins. He shouted at this girl to look after the children, and he himself deftly dealt with goblins, although he himself thought that there was no end to this goblin. His knife is already stained with blood, and soon it will become harder for them to strike. Then he heard a strange sound and turned around, saw that one goblin was already stepping on a girl with children, and they were completely defenseless now. Ryuji was scared, although it was not visible, and thought that he was too far away. But still he was able to catch up with him. However, when he tried to stab him with a knife, he realized that his knife could no longer cut their flesh. And then he had to defend himself from the goblins' blows with his own hands, and fight off these goblins with your fists. He fought off the goblin. The girl was worried and scared. She asked him if he was okay. Ryuji's arm was injured. However, he very calmly told this girl that his dominant arm was not injured, so he would be able to fight. The girl said she didn't ask about that. Despite the fact that he was injured, he wanted to save them, which is why he calmly told her that he would detain these goblins, and she should run away with the children. The The girl asked what, but what about him? To which he replied to her so that she would not worry about him because he could still fight. The girl shouted at him not to talk this nonsense. She's not going anywhere, she's going to fight too. But Ryuji said it was a very bad idea. After all, she must protect children first of all. If she went into battle fighting for him, then they would be defenseless. The girl said she understood, but she didn't know what she had to say, so she just shut up. Ryuji understood that the situation was really just disgusting. The number of goblins has not decreased at all, and they are also strong and very fast. And his strength is gradually running out. He was going to kill them all, however, if his strength ran out faster. What should he do then? Then someone shouted for him to use his magic. Ryuji turned around at the cry and saw that the magicians had come to their aid. Apparently, their conscience did not allow them to abandon their savior. The blonde-haired guy shouted at Ryuji that magic could enhance his physical abilities. Ryuji was surprised to see them here, and the girl was very glad to see them and said that they had come. Ryuji didn't know what he should tell them, so he asked why. The magician with blonde hair said that if he was going to die here, it wouldn't work. After all, they are still in the same dungeon. And while the two of them were shouting at each other, the other magicians were already dealing with the goblins. One of them told the girl to shoot there. The girl asked him that where else should she shoot. Ryuji was really very happy to see them. He smiled and, turning to the girl, asked what was wrong. How could he use magic? The girl began to explain to him that, for example, goblins increase the strength of their body's acute magical energy, although it is rare. However, adventurers who don't know how to conjure can do the same. Ryuji listened to her and said that he understood. So that's why they're fast, only and he does not know how. The virtual assistant understood the course of his thoughts and interrupting him, said that yes, it's easy. He showed him his own indicators and told him to take a look at them, and also asked if he knows what mana is. After that, without even waiting for his answer, it was apparently clear that Ryuji did not understand the word at all and began to explain to him what it was. Mana is witchcraft points that he can use as he wishes. Ryuji was distracted for a moment and looked at these goblins. Since he now began to look at them more closely, he was able to see that purple aura that envelops them and said that this was it. Now he understood everything. He really was able to figure it out and used his magic. He said that this is how this magic feels. The goblins didn't even have time to do anything. Everything was really very fast for them, and they were already dead. Ryuji's speed has increased several times. Ryuji said it's quite convenient. The girl was very surprised that she understood so quickly how to wield her magic and said that it was really very amazing. He immediately understood how to use his magic. After that, he also gained confidence. He was about to attack all the remaining goblins, but he heard some sounds. Turning around, he saw a huge goblin. One of the magicians was horrified and asked if it was really the Goblin King. They got scared and shouted that they had to run. They can't handle him. This Goblin King, hearing their screams, grinned. Apparently, he really liked that everyone was afraid of him. But Ryuji wasn't going to back down, so he said no because he could handle him. The Goblin King one attacked him, but Ryuji didn't lag behind him either. He used his magic again and attacked this Goblin King right in the stomach. The Goblin King was defeated by one of his blows. The magicians were surprised and horrified at the same time. Everyone froze in disbelief, and no one even moved. Even the goblins didn't change their movements. Everyone held their breath for a moment. No one expected such a turn of events. Ryuji saw a sword on the ground. He picked up the sword and, approaching the girl, handed her the weapon and asked what it was, wasn't it? The girl was delighted and said yes, and she also thanked him for it. The two little kids he saved ran up to Ryuji and told him that he was so cool and strong. They were very excited and, apparently, were afraid that he would not listen to them or go somewhere and asked him to listen and said that his sister said that they would definitely come for them, and he came, and also thanked him for it. It was really cool. Ryuji didn't say anything to them, just patted them both on the head. The girl clutched her sword in her hands and, watching Ryuji, thought that this could not be. This man defeated the Goblin King with his bare hands. Who is he? The bodies of these goblins also dissolved and many different rewards appeared. All the magicians immediately lit up their eyes and, apparently, they even forgot that they had recently been shaking with fear like an aspen leaf, immediately rushed to the awards. They all began to rake these treasures. Ryuji wasn't in much of a hurry to get to the treasures, since the wounds of the wounds were being healed by a magician. And he wasn't really interested in all these treasures either. The girl could not calm her curiosity in any way, and kept looking at him. After some time, when all the awards were sorted out and Ryuji was cured, the magician with blonde hair said that it was time for them to go home now. Everyone supported his idea and set out on their way. After a while they reached the village. The children immediately rushed to their parents, who looked very scared and tearful. The parents were finally reunited with their children and were very happy about it. They started hugging their children. After that, the parents began to thank the magician with blonde hair for saving their children. They even began to bow to him, because they were very grateful to him for saving their children. The magician was a little at a loss. He was pointing his finger at Ryuji, making it clear that he was the one who saved them. His parents looked at him with tears in their eyes and began to bow and thank him. Ryuji looked a little embarrassed, and the two magicians who stood behind him were grinning. It ended very peacefully, and now everyone has returned to their home. After all this, a magician with blonde hair approached Ryuji and asked him if he was sure. After all, he deserved most of the items they got from this dungeon. Apparently, he really had no intention of taking these treasures. Ryuji shook his head negatively and said that, but they eventually found a way out of the dungeon themselves. He didn't deserve a reward. The magician froze, did not know what to say to this, because he understood that without his help they would have been dead for a long time. So it was he who deserved the reward. But he understood that it was simply useless to argue with him, and that's why he got something. Apparently he had prepared it in advance, since he subconsciously understood that Ryuji would refuse the reward, and said that, however, he should still take this. They would have died of that lizard without him. He handed him a bag of money and told him that it would be very difficult for him to travel the world without money. Ryuji took this bag of money and said that he was probably right. Then he'll take them. After that, all the magicians said goodbye to Ryuji and the girl who decided to follow him. Ryuji pointed to the bag of awards and asked her where he could sell all these things. The girl stopped for a moment and began to carefully evaluate these awards and eventually said that in the Adventurers Guild. And pointing in the right direction, she said that she was there. One of the headquarters is located in the underground city of Radom. It's over that mountain. Ryuji said that he understood and, thanking the girl, went there on foot. The girl was surprised and stopped him. She asked him if he would really fall there on foot. It's just some kind of nonsense. Ryuji stopped and said that, but he didn't have any money at all. The girl told him that if that was the only problem, then they could go with her money. They will get into the cart and get to the city. Ryuji said that, but he borrows money from her. The girl understood what he wanted to say, and that's why she interrupted him and said that he should consider it to be gratitude for her rescue. Let her thank him. Ryuji said that if she wanted to. Hearing this, the girl finally exhaled. She looked at him carefully and thought that this guy was so strange. He is incredibly strong, but he navigates their world like a baby, as if he came from another world. By evening, the two of them reached a small village, and we decided to check into a motel in order to spend the night, and tomorrow we will go further on the road. They went into the shop, where they decided to spend the night. The girl approached the man behind the counter. She told this man that a room for two. The man said that yes, of course, now they will look. Ryuji approached her and asked her if she was sure, living in the same room. The girl looked at him and asked if he was really against it. Ryuji said that yes, not really. And he himself thought about it and thought that for sure this is the order of things for adventurers. But the man behind the counter said that, unfortunately, there are no such free rooms. However, the girl looked at him questioningly, although at that time she was filling out some documents. The man asked that maybe they would be satisfied with a room for the newlyweds. The girl looked at Ryuji, and Ryuji looked at her. Then she raised the awkward silence. The girl thought for a moment, after which she blushed deeply and began to shout that she was not. In her surprise, she even broke the pen with which she filled out all these documents. She started explaining that they were just traveling together, that's all. Ryuji didn't even change his face. It didn't bother him at all, and thought how noisy it was. After that, the girl, lowering her head, said that 2 rooms would still suit them. After they checked in, the girl went to Ryuji's room and said that tomorrow they would already get to the city. Closing the door, she added that, in the meantime, good night. Ryuji also wished her good night. When he was alone, he was finally able to relax on the bed. He called out to his virtual assistant and asked if he could hear him. The virtual assistant immediately showed up and said that yes, he was here. The virtual assistant asked him what is it. Ryuji got up and the virtual assistant, without giving him anything to say, said that he already knows everything. He understands him, because he wants to know why he was here and what happened to him. However, he can't tell more than he should. But Ryuji was not going to listen to him anymore and, therefore, interrupted. He said he wanted to ask him about one thing. The virtual assistant asked what and about what. Ryuji asked him if he would be able to return to his world. The virtual assistant thought for a moment, then said that it was possible. There are 10 dungeons in this world. These are mythical rank dungeons. Perhaps there he will find the answer to his question. Ryuji muttered to himself that the dungeon was of mythical rank, and he himself remembered the words of the magician who told him that there were still monsters of mythical and legendary rank. However, they are very rare. After that, Ryuji lay down on the bed again and said that he understood. The virtual assistant was surprised and asked what's what. Is that really all? Maybe he still wants to ask him something. Well, for example. However, Ryuji interrupted him and told him to be quiet and let him sleep. The virtual assistant didn't say anything else. The next morning, they immediately, without wasting time, set off on their way. Here the girl stopped for a while and turned to him. She asked him to look there. That's where the underground city of Reborn is located. They're almost there. After that, the two of them entered this city. There were a lot of shops with all sorts of trinkets and food. There were a lot of people in this city and therefore there was a constant noise. It was really very lively here. Children were rushing between the shops, playing something, and adults, as if they did not pay attention to them at all. Apparently it was common that children were so active, doing their own business. Ryuji looked around and asked if this was the underground city of Reborn. The girl said yes. She began to tell him that at the bottom of this rift there used to be one of the 6 legendary dungeons. However, after a group of adventurers cleaned it up at this place, it was decided to establish a new city. Ryuji said that is, this city was created thanks to adventurers. It's pretty busy here, and besides, there are a lot of different races living here. He looked at a group of guys who were communicating with each other and realized that one of them was a werewolf, and the other was an elf, and the third was just an ordinary old man. He hesitated for a moment, turned to the girl to listen to him, but he could not say what exactly he wanted. The girl pouted and said her name was Feria. She was probably really hurt by this, and she said that she was to him, that he could call her by her first name. Ryuji said that yes, he remembers it. And he himself thought that why did she insist on it so much? Maybe in this world, calling by name is in the order of things. Then he addressed her by name. Feria was listening to him very attentively now, and she asked him that he wanted something, calling him master. Ryuji felt awkward, and he thought, why then does she treat him so respectfully? But apparently he didn't want to focus on this, and so he just asked her that they were heading to the Adventurers Guild right now, right? Feria said that was the point. Ryuji asked what is a guild? Feria was a little surprised by his question and asked out of surprise, what's what? She cleared her throat and said that she would explain everything to him now. And she began to explain everything to him in order. She said that the Adventurers Guild is an organization that supports the peace and quiet of the common people. It also provides support directly to adventurers. The function of the guild is quite extensive, for example, such as there is a distribution of adventurers by ranks and classes, such as conducting an assessment of the dungeon, issuing orders, buying and selling rare items from dungeons. This organization, whose headquarters are located in every city, their country. We can safely say that adventurers are heroes of their time. Ryuji listened to her very attentively and said that's how it was. And he asked what it meant that he could sell all these things at the guild headquarters. And he took out his bag, which the magician gave him. While he was asking her this, Feria paused for a moment at the counter and bought them some snacks. But still she listened to him attentively and answered him that yes. However, first he will have to register in the registry in order to become a full-fledged adventurer. Otherwise, he will not be able to sell these things. Then she gave him food. Ryuji started eating and thought that adventurers, so he needs to explore the dungeon in order to return to his world. So it will not be superfluous for him to register with the guild. Feria said that she was sure that such a strong person like him would be given the rank of a Ryuji decided to ask and asked that. By the way, what is her rank? Feria was confused and, lowering her head, said that so far her rank is C. After some time, they finally reached the Adventurers Guild. They stood at the door and Feria told him that here they were. They went inside. There were a lot of people there. Someone was just sitting at tables and drinking alcoholic beverages. The man behind the bar, who was now drinking beer, asked the girl if she was free tonight, to which the girl replied to him that there was no one for him. And some adventurers were standing at the stand. Apparently, they were considering tasks and choosing which one they would go to now. Feria did not pay any attention to them at all, and together with Ryuji, she went to the registration desk and asked for forgiveness, said that this person would like to register in the registry. The girl said she understood, and having already turned to Ryuji, I asked him if he could fill out a questionnaire. Ryuji thought that he could speak their language, but he didn't know the alphabet at all, so he said no. The girl accepted this information quite calmly and said that it was fine. Then she would fill out the questionnaire for him. She took out a questionnaire and took a pen, told him to tell her what type of magic he had. Ryuji said he wasn't a magician. The girl was surprised and stopped questioningly, looking at him. After a short silence, she asked what. Then she said she was sorry, but they couldn't register a person who didn't have magic. Feria was also confused and told her to wait a bit. She started standing up for Ryuji and said that yes, he is not a magician, but he is very strong. He defeated the Goblin King and the dragon alone. But she didn't know that the last words would affect the people who were currently in the guild in this way. Upon hearing this, everyone in the Adventurers Guild froze, and then they began to laugh loudly, bursting into tears. Some guy said that he had never heard of greater stupidity in his life. The old man said she was joking funny. Feria got angry and said yes, how dare they? They don't even know the whole truth, so they also mock him. Ryuji was not offended by this at all. Well, at least he remained the same unshakable. He stopped her and said that everything was fine, it wasn't worth it. Then some guy told her that everything was clear here, that she was cheating on them. This guy couldn't defeat such monsters alone without magic. How, in his opinion, it would be much better for her to join him. He came up to her and, grabbing her hand, said that he was sure that they would have a great time together. Feria felt uncomfortable from the fact that he grabbed her hand. But he grabbed Ryuji by the arm, not letting him finish. He told him to fuck off. The man got angry and asked what was wrong with him. Ryuji hid the girl behind his back and asked if he couldn't see that he was disgusting to her. This guy called him names and said that how could he be such a piece of shit who couldn't even do magic, dare to tell him. Ryuji remained calm, and he thought that a little more and Feria would have cut off his hand, because she had even already grabbed her sword. This guy called out to his friends, said they'd better teach this jerk a lesson. After that, Ryuji and Feria were surrounded by them. Ryuji was already on full alert, but then the girl who refused to register him got very scared and asked them all to calm down. And at that moment, a man came down from the second floor and asked what they were doing here. His guilds are not an arena for them to fight. This man looked at Ryuji with an appraising gaze. He came down and approached him and said that he could see that they had a new one. Ryuji asked Feria, "Who is this?" Feria said it was a local guild master. The guild master asked, "What happened here?" To which he was told that yes, they were just arguing enthusiastically, nothing special. The guild master, apparently, began to get angry and asked what it was like. It wasn't particularly obvious from them that they were just arguing. The guy tried to convince him of this and therefore told him that everything was fine. But the guild master did not let him finish and hit him. He stood over him and said that this guild belongs to him. They shouldn't act like they're at home here. Then Na noticed Ryuji and asked what is it? Does he really have something to say? But Ryuji didn't tell him anything. A girl came up to the master and began to tell him that this man. The master listened to her and asked what it was like. He turned to Ryuji and asked that he had come to register in the registry as a new adventurer, didn't he? Ryuji firmly and briefly said yes, but apparently he had no intention of staying here anymore, which is why he turned towards the door and said that. However, when he saw him, he changed his mind. Feria also did not expect this and called out to him. The guild master was already seething with anger and shouted for him to stop. He was already very angry and asked him that he was scared of him, wasn't he? After that, they went outside the Adventurers Guild building. It was a training ground. All the others who wanted to look at them also came out and sat down at the stands. Now they were all waiting for this duel. One of the guys who attacked Ryuji told Feria that her friend was unlucky. He's just a poor guy after running into this guy. Feria was scared for a moment and asked what's wrong with him. To which he replied that beating up all the newbies is their master's favorite hobby. Another guy said that he couldn't even count how many unfortunate people he had sent to the infirmary. Hearing this, Feria calmed down and, exhaling, said that if this was the case, then there was nothing to worry about. After all, Ryuji would never lose. The guy who was standing next to her asked that where did she get so much confidence in this guy. The guildmaster and Ryuzaki were already standing in the arena, and looking at each other without saying a word. The guildmaster was the first to break the silence. He turned to Ryuji and asked him what and when they would start. Ryuji stood silently. He was assessing the whole situation. He thought that he was very good at hand-to-hand combat. However, his opponent uses magic. First, he needs to understand what he can do at all. The guildmaster apparently couldn't wait any longer, so without saying anything else, he attacked Ryuji first. But Ryuji broke through his attack and was about to strike at him. But the master used another magic. The master told him that he was quite good. Although Ryuji didn't show it, he was at a loss and thought that he had just. Feria was also surprised and asked, what is fire and earth? Does he really use two elements at once? Just then, the guild master displayed a system window in which all his characteristics were presented. His name was Rocio. The race is human. His profession was a master of the Adventurers Guild. His level was 58. He had two skills such as level 54 fire magic and level 49 earth magic. Adventurers are born with a greater predisposition to magic than ordinary people, and at birth, a person does not have a certain magical attribute. However, with the time of development of the ability, it is possible to choose one of 4 attributes. Most people choose the fire element, as it is considered the most powerful of all. A person who is able to manage 2 attributes is immediately considered a rather rare frame. One of the guys who was laughing at Ryuji exhaled and sat down on the bench. He said that everything is as usual. He said it very calmly. Apparently, it really was a common occurrence, and no one was even surprised. Everyone just kept looking at this fight, waiting for its outcome. The guy who was standing next to him asked if he was still not thinking of giving up. Rossio laughed and asked Ryuji what is it. If he only runs away, he won't be able to defeat him. He felt his superiority in this duel, and that's why it amused him. Ryuji said he was right, and he himself thought that his attacks were very sweeping, but they were not so strong. If he can give himself an acceleration with the help of strengthening magic, then in that case he will be able to get close to him. That's exactly what he's done now. He used magic and approached Rossio with great speed, so Rossio didn't even see anything. He was just very surprised, and Ryuji had already gotten close enough to him, and was about to strike at him. However, he did not. The master only squeezed his eyes shut and fell to his knees in fear. No one expected this. The master was very scared and did not intend to continue this fight. The guys jumped up from the benches and said that it was very cool. He defeated the guild master. Feria wasn't surprised at all. She was very proud of Ryuji and said that she had spoken. Ryuji asked the master, so what? What would he say about that? The master experienced terrible humiliation and, gritting his teeth, said that if he was not a magician, then he had no place in the guild. Despite his loss, he still didn't want Ryuji to join their guild. Hearing this, the audience was alarmed, started shouting that it was unfair. He'd done him in without magic, to which the master shouted at them to shut up in his word. This is the law here, and if they contradict him, he will personally turn each of them into mincemeat. After hearing this, everyone was dissatisfied and fell silent. Then a girl ran out onto the field and shouted that there was trouble. The master asked her what happened. The girl said that the troll got out of the dungeon and is causing chaos in the city. The master asked what's what. A real panic began. The residents of this city were very scared. They scattered wherever they looked. The main thing was to get away from this place. They shouted that it was necessary to save those who could. The monster was a troll of huge stature, level 37. He also possessed 2 skills, such as level 30 super strength and level 35 regeneration. He started growling and destroying all the buildings in his path. Magicians came out to help people. They took up fighting positions and shouted that they needed to shoot. Shoot now. There was a huge explosion. Dust had risen, so nothing could be seen. One of the magicians was delighted and asked if it really worked. But when all the dust settled, they saw that it didn't work. This huge troll grabbed them with his paws and dragged them along. The magicians who stayed on the battlefield said that nothing takes him. If this continues, he will destroy their entire city. They no longer knew what to do, because their magic against him, apparently, was powerless. Rossio asked that the troll got out of the dungeon, didn't he? He started shouting that they were kidding. It's just not possible. Feria looked at him accusingly and said that no, if you don't clean the dungeon for a long time, then there may be too many monsters, and they can all gradually come out of the dungeon. The guildmaster was at a loss. He grabbed his head and said yes. How is that? Since no one knew what to do, and Master Rossio was the most important one here, they began to shout at him. And they also scolded him. They asked that how could he allow such a thing? He put their city in great danger. Why didn't he organize a squad to clean up the overpopulated dungeon? This attack is entirely his fault. Master Rossio didn't know what to do and what to say. He just mumbled that yes, no. Ryuji realized that he wouldn't achieve anything here, so he silently decided to leave here. Feria noticed this and asked where he was going. Ryuji stopped and said that he needed to kill this monster. If this troll is not stopped, then the whole city will be in ruins. Feria ran after him and said it was true, and she asked him to stop because she would go with him. The others also could not sit idly by. Because it concerned their city, they rushed and shouted that they too. Ryuji decided to find out more about this troll, so he asked Feria what is the main feature of the troll. The girl said that he is somewhat similar in body structure to a human, but much larger than the same orcs. Trolls are strong, but stupid and can't use magic. But the biggest problem when fighting with them. At that moment they came to the place of battle and saw a girl who was hiding nearby, decided to attack this troll stealthily, and with the help of his magic, he cut off his hand. The troll screamed, but a moment later his arm was restored. Noticing this, Ryuji asked, what is regeneration? Feria said that, yes, and this is the biggest problem. If he can't decapitate it, then it will regenerate indefinitely. Usually adventurers, if they meet trolls in the dungeons, they lure him into a trap and attack his head while standing on a hill. However, there is no high point in this city where they could lure him and attack from a height. Ryuji looked around carefully and thought that maybe this was the case. However, this troll does not know how to use magic at all. Magic attacks are not as effective against him. And for physical, no one can get to him quickly. However, he still has 5 summoning weapon coins. He called out to those guys who followed him and said he was going to beat him, and he asked if they would help him. These guys froze for a moment, not knowing what to say. Meanwhile, while Ryuji was working out his plan with those guys, Faria was taking people out of there to a safe place. She told them to run here and not panic. They should follow her. Ryuji told those guys his plan and one of them went to distract him, drawing attention to himself. He started waving his arms and shouting to the troll that he was here. The guy who was standing behind the troll shouted that he had missed him. The troll noticed him and immediately rushed after them. The guys ran as fast as they could to the training ground. Meanwhile, at the training ground, Ryuji had already finished all the preparations. He looked towards the entrance and said that they had brought him after all. Perhaps he was even a little surprised at this, because he probably thought that these guys were good for nothing. But they really managed to do what Ryuji had planned. So far, everything has been going smoothly. The guys shouted to him that they had done as he asked them, and he followed them. Ryuji said it was great and thanked them for their help. He'll take care of the rest himself. Faria also came to Ryuji's aid at the training ground and asked him what he was going to do. Ryuji didn't say anything. Apparently he didn't need her help. He just took a small piece of glass out of his pocket and started distracting the troll with sunny hairs. The whole plan that Ryuji came up with worked, and when he managed to distract the troll with sunny hairs, he thought that now. After that, he pulled on the ropes prepared in advance and there was a big explosion. Everyone held their breath waiting for what would happen next. The guys were surprised and asked what it had just been. At first there was a bright light, and after that the troll was already lying on the ground. But what was it? Is it really an explosion? But he's not a magician. Faria calmly explained to them and said that it wasn't magic. Then she was asked, then what is it? Ryuji wasn't paying attention to anyone right now. He was focused on this monster. Ryuji thought, did his maneuver really work? And it really turned out well. He just needed a couple of mines for such a trap. However, he could not have imagined that he would use them on monsters. Then Faria called out to him, and the guy who was standing next to her said that the troll was trying to get up. Everyone panicked again, because everyone had a hope that this would be the end of it. Hearing this, Ryuji immediately rushed to the troll and said that he would not have time. He took out another gold coin and crushed it in his palm, turning it into a grenade. Then he threw it straight at the troll. It hit him near the head and exploded. After that, Ryuji took out a couple more grenades and threw them at him. And then he took out the last coin and squeezed it in his fist, said that and finally, and a machine gun appeared in his hands. It was the turn of 5.56x 45mm NATO bullets from a double-barreled machine gun AATM-52. Ryuji began to shoot the troll from this machine gun. Now the troll will definitely not get up. The virtual assistant notified him that his level had been raised several times. Faria ran up to him, worried and agitated. She asked him if he was injured. Ryuji said he was fine. The two guys ran up to him and started admiring him and telling him that he was just something. What was it? It doesn't look like magic, does it? Does he want to join their group? Faria watched this from the sidelines and thought that the adventurers who thought he was a weakling now want to work with him. She looked at Ryuji again and thought, but he is clearly not as simple as it seems at first glance. He uses weapons that none of them have ever seen before. Where did he come to them from? Then the guild master Rocio appeared. Everyone turned around and looked at him. Now, apparently, everyone is not quite friendly to him. The guy shouted at him that it was enough to deny the obvious. Another one picked him up and said that this guy single-handedly saved their city from a troll. The guy with the dark hair said that he deserves no less than the rank of a not otherwise. The guild master was furious and told them to shut up. He pointed his finger at Ryuji and said that he had just seen him using a strange weapon. There will be no such person in his guild. Rocio gave any reason for Ryuji not to join his guild. And even now, when there was a majority on Ryuji's side, he did not retreat. Therefore, he loudly told everyone that he would not accept him for anything. A person who does not possess magic cannot be an adventurer, period. People rebelled, started shouting that it was just some kind of nonsense. It's unfair. The guild master tried to shout over them. He was yelling at them all to shut up. Is life really cheap for all of them? And at that moment, when this riot had already begun and everyone was practically alarmed against the guild master, another man came and interrupted the speeches of this master and said that he was allowing himself too much. Being a guild master, Ryuji asked that who is he. The guy with blonde hair who was standing next to him said that this man was something like the local mayor. The mayor told the master of the Adventurers Guild that he did not remember giving him so much authority. Rossio tried to justify himself, but his speech was not coherent. Apparently he was stunned by the sudden appearance of the measure. Rossio said that, but it's his guild, and he. The mayor interrupted him and said that's right. He is the master of this guild and must behave like a master. Or does he want his behavior to be recognized at the central headquarters? The guild master, apparently, was very frightened by his words. So he fell on his knees in front of him and began to ask him for forgiveness. The mayor of this city turned to Ryuji and said that he apologized to him for the rudeness of the citizens, and he wants to personally thank him for saving their city. And I asked him that he seemed to want to register in the guild register, didn't he? He doesn't have to worry anymore. About this, he will personally monitor the process of its registration. Ryuji interrupted him. He decided to stand up for the citizens of this city and said that, however, thanks to the help of rude citizens, he was able to defeat this troll. Without them, this victory would not have been possible. The mayor of the city told him that, and he is quite modest. Any adventurer would declare himself as a hero who single-handedly saved the city. He turned to Feria and said that he had to admit that she had good taste in men. Feria was embarrassed and asked him to stop talking this nonsense. The guy who helped Ryuji asked her if she really knew the count. The mayor of the city heard him and, turning to him, said that, of course, they knew each other. After all, Feria is his beloved daughter. After some time, when all the differences were resolved, Feria and Ryuji were already going to karate with her father. Feria was sitting next to her father, and Ryuji was sitting across from his. The mayor took out an envelope with a letter and said that a couple of days ago he received a letter from his daughter, where she told him about him and their meeting. Ryuji thought that a couple of days. She must have sent him a letter while she was at the motel. The mayor of the city said that usually his daughter writes him a report about her travels, and here. He hesitated a little and said that he did not expect to hear such a sincere story from her. It was so unlike her. Feria couldn't stand it. She was very embarrassed by this, and asked her father to stop already. Ryuji looked at her and thought that now he could look up the information about Feria. The status window was highlighted, where her characteristics were. Her name was Feria. The race is human. Profession, adventurer, swordsman. And she also had 2 skills, such as level 34 fencing and level 18 fire magic. Ryuji thought that there was no information about her origin. And why is it not indicated here that she is the daughter of the Count of the city of Radom? The daughter told her father that he promised to behave decently. The father said that it was true and asked her for forgiveness. Ryuji also looked at its characteristics. Her father's name was Yehen Murabit. The race is human. Profession, mayor of the city, count. His level was 54, and he had 1 skill, level 60 fencing. Ryuji thought that even though her father had his status listed in the profession, and yet he didn't understand a damn thing about this system. Then the mayor of the city turned to him and said that, by the way, about the items that fell from the troll. And I asked him if he was sure he didn't want to take them. He can take them and transfer them to him if there is such a need. Ryuji said that everything was fine. He wants to move around the world light, so he doesn't need extra things. The mayor said that's how it is. Then the man who was taking them in the carriage knocked on them and told the mayor of the city that they had already arrived. The mayor said welcome to his house, to the ancestral mansion of the Murabit family. When they arrived, the maid immediately escorted Ryuji to his private room, which was allocated to him. First of all, he decided to change his clothes. Then he was escorted to the dining room. Ryuji thought that the count was simply a local noble of this world. While he was here, then naturally he carefully examined the places of the mansion where he was. Ryuji thought that he didn't know how much power he had. However, it seemed that he was very rich. Then Feria came and said that here they were and asked him for forgiveness for waiting. The girl also changed her clothes. A status window appeared above her again, saying that she had level 34 fencing and level 18 fire magic, and also where her race was written. From the new, a profession appeared in which it was written that she was the daughter of an earl. Ryuji thought that is, the status may change, depending on the circumstances, right? For spies and assassins, this is a very convenient feature. Feria was confused and asked him if something was really wrong. She looks silly, doesn't she, in this gorgeous dress? But Ryuji interrupted her and said no. He thinks it suits her very well. Feria blushed at what she heard. Then they sat down at the table. The mayor turned to Ryuji and said that he wanted to express to him his personal gratitude for saving his daughter from the goblins. He knows that this will sound very rude on his part, but who is he? Feria stood up for Ryuji and said that this man had single-handedly defeated the Goblin King and the Troll. He should show him respect. She asks him very much because he is their guest, but Ryuji assured her that everything was fine, and he himself thought that sooner or later he had to tell someone about who he was. He wants to build a trusting relationship with them, so he needs to be honest, and he told them that he had come here from another world. After that, he explained to them for a long time what happened, who he was and how he got here, and the mayor and his daughter listened to him very attentively. In the end, Feria said that so that's it. The mayor said that who would have thought that the gods would want to summon a person from another world. This is the first time he has encountered such a case, and I asked him what he wanted. Ryuji said that he wished to return to his world, and to do this, he needs to go through all the dungeons of the mythical rank. Feria asked what all the dungeons were of mythical rank. Yes, how is that? Only one person can pass only one dungeon of this rank once every 100 years, and he talks about everyone, it's the same. But Ryuji interrupted her and said that if it was impossible, it did not mean that he would just give up such a goal. After all, his friends are waiting for him in his world. The mayor said he understood him. He thinks that the gods themselves have set such a condition for him, doesn't he? Ryuji didn't really understand what he was talking about, so he asked him what was he talking about. The mayor explained to him that the entrance to the mythical rank dungeon always remains closed. In order to get there, you must have the key to the divine gate with you. This key is located in a dungeon and is of legendary rank. The closest of them is the Dragon King dungeon. The key to it is located in the depths of the underground city of Radom. To obtain them, the mayor's permission is required. Simply put, he can get the key with his permission. After listening to him, Ryuji asked if he could give it to him. The mayor said that of course he was very grateful to him for saving the city and his daughter, but no. He behaves like a coward, but he wants to be very honest with him. In return for this key, he wanted to ask him for a favor. He must conquer a dungeon of legendary rank, and also to protect their city. Hearing the condition, Ryuji did not even change his face. He only asked the mayor of the city and asked why he was putting such conditions on him. The mayor said it was because of the unstable core of the dungeon. His daughter tensed up and said that it was. Ryuji asked what it meant. Feria began to explain to him and said that a bundle of energy, which is endowed with the power of God, and which keeps the dungeons under control. This is called the core. The core is always located in the deepest part of the dungeon. Thanks to him, dungeons can exist. By killing monsters, adventurers suppress the core forces, and when monsters do not remain in the dungeon at all, the core ceases to exist. But this core is not like that. Ryuji said that this means that there is a legendary rank dungeon with an unstable core under Radom, right? The mayor said it was true, and if nothing is done, then hordes of monsters will invade the city straight from the dungeon, and thus it will begin to enslave new lands. And he also asks him to destroy this unstable core and protect their city from this threat. He understands how selfish it is to ask him about it, because they have just met. But Ryuji, without even thinking, said that he agreed. Father and daughter were very surprised. Feria was a little taken aback by Ryuji's quick response, so she decided to check with him. Feria asked him if he was sure of that. She explained that there would be S-rank monsters in the legendary dungeon. Defeating the monsters will not be so easy, to which Ryuji told her that he still needed a key to open a mythic rank dungeon. If there is no other way, then he agrees to such conditions. Feria said she understood him. If that's the case, then let her go with him. The father was surprised. I called my daughter. The girl said that she admires Ryuji's heroism and also wants to help him along the way. The father said he understood her. Then he asks them both to save their city. After the conversation and when they ate, Ryuji and Feria immediately went in search of this dungeon. They had already been walking for a long time and Feria told him that the entrance to the dungeon was in that direction. They need to go. Ryuji saw the status window above her head again, and I realized that her profession had changed again. She had only to change her clothes. Then he turned to her and asked why she, the daughter of an earl, decided to become an adventurer. Feria said it was because she wanted to become like her father. Her father served the current king as the first knight of the kingdom. He has already saved the kingdom of Naxos from a war with monsters. Peaceful days began in the kingdom. The only problem is still the dungeons. That's why she decided that she would keep the peace that her father had brought. However, already being an adventurer, Ryuji listened carefully to her story and said that it didn't sound so bad. Speaking of which, before they enter the dungeon, won't she demonstrate her skills in action? After all, he does not know what she is capable of. This way it will be easier for them to coordinate in the dungeon. Feria thought for a while, after which she agreed with him. They saw a huge pile of stones, and there they decided to test Feria's strength. Feria, taking out her sword, said that go ahead. After she struck the stones, all the stones were cleared in the blink of an eye. Ryuji, watching her closely, said that she was strong, compared to those wizards from the Goblin Dungeon. Feria thanked him for his praise and said that, however, Ryuji didn't speak right away either, but then he interrupted her, which made Feria shudder as if she was afraid that she would be scolded. It was as if Ryuji knew what she wanted to say and said that her weak point was that it took a lot of time to prepare for such a powerful attack. That's why she couldn't protect the children in the dungeon. Feria said that yes, he was right. Since childhood, she realized that she could only use magic by attacking with a sword. She won't be able to use magic otherwise, and apologized to him. Ryuji said she shouldn't apologize. After all, she is talented, and no one can attack with such power as she does. She just needs to come up with a strategy in which she can act more effectively, and asked her if they were coming. The girl was confused and said yes. Then Ryuji's own characteristics were highlighted, and he thought about his level. It is very difficult for him to determine whether he is high or low. Now his level was already 15. And the melee skill was already level 79. He thought that he would like to purchase some summoning weapon coins before entering the dungeon. After some time, they came to some kind of teleport that was right below them, and they were standing very high. Feria told him that you can get to the entrance by going through this teleport. However, it's still scary, isn't it? The teleporter is located right above the abyss in the dungeon. But Ryuji has already jumped down without even listening to her. Feria was startled by surprise. She leaned over and called him, asking him to stop. But Feria followed right after him. When he landed, he had already seen several monsters. One of them was a level 21 orc. His skill was a level 27 super strength. They communicated very quietly. Ryuji asked quietly, "Is this really another monster?" Feria said yes. Apparently, the monsters have already slowly started to get out of the dungeon. Orcs are dangerous because they always walk in groups and have super strength. They do not shine with intelligence, and that is why they are usually lured out one by one and killed. But in this situation there is a risk of detection by other orcs. But Ryuji said no, it's not a bad idea. Her magic will help in this. Orcs wandered back and forth. One of the orcs heard a sound. He tensed up and when, in order to see exactly what happened, he saw that one of his comrades had injured his leg and fell. Suddenly a stone flew into the head of one of them. This orc looked back in the direction from which he had flown, and I saw Ryuji there with another stone in his hand. He was grinning. Ryuji jumped into the pit with them, and everyone immediately rushed after him. Ryuji ran away from them, leading them all somewhere in one place. Ryuji thought they were faster than they looked. He used acceleration magic and thought that, however, still, he was used to using magic. Now he can move much faster and more confidently, so now is the time to test its power in action. He stopped abruptly. Ryuji took the stone in his hands and threw it with all his might at the orcs. This stone, although it was small, it fit into Ryuji's palm, but still it pierced the head of one of them. Ryuji looked at the orcs who were already very close, apparently worried that his plan would fail, and therefore thought that at the very least he would be able to fight them off with magic, while using various objects on your way. Yes, but there were a lot more of them than he expected. Well, that's fine. He had almost reached the right place, after which, he ran again with all his might. When he reached the right place, Ryuji stopped and, turning to face the orcs, gave Feria a signal that now. Feria heard his signal, and when she came out of her hiding place, she immediately took out her sword and said yes. After that, she used the same blow with her sword as she did in the forest with stones. Most of the orcs were killed by Feria's sword. The virtual assistant immediately perked up and notified Ryuji about his level increase. Ryuji was a little surprised by this and thought that even though he didn't kill them, his level also rose. He looked at Feria, who was now looking at the corpses of the orcs that she herself had laid down, and thought that, but the most important thing was that Feria's level rose. The girl put away her sword. Now she was very excited and surprised. She said it was the first time she had defeated so many monsters in one blow. She turned to Ryuji and bowed and thanked him for it. Ryuji walked past her and said that it was not worth it. After all, she always had such power. He walked up to the remains of the orcs, which had begun to disintegrate again, and looked at the coins that had fallen from these orcs and thought that a bunch of draft weapon coins had fallen from them. And this is just in time, because they will be useful in their conquest of the dungeon. Then he noticed some strange coin and bending down, he picked it up and asked what is this? Feria came up to him and said that it was a magic coin. This thing can completely restore his mana. When using magic, mana is consumed. It accumulates in the human body from the air, but it takes a very long time to recover. but this coin can completely restore his mana reserve. Ryuji asked that how long can mana recover in a person's body without using this coin. Feria thought about it and said that in her case, it would take more than an hour to fully restore mana. Ryuji asked her what and how much mana she spent in one attack. Feria lowered her head and guiltily told him that out of 120 points she had only 3 left. Ryuji thought that he wouldn't need much mana to use magic. He looked at Feria again and thought that unlike Feria, she would need these coins much more. He assessed his characteristics and, turning to her, said that then all the magic coins would be stored with her. She would need them much more, given her abilities. Feria accepted the coin and thanked him. Now they can go inside. After that, without stopping for a minute, they moved forward. Ryuji walked in front. He was thinking about a lot right now. He thought that this world was still a mystery to him. There are bright particles in the air that illuminate their path, as if it was intended for a comfortable exploration of the territory. But then he stopped abruptly and stopped Feria. The girl looked at him questioningly and asked, "What is it?" Without saying a word, the two of them hid behind rocks and began to watch the people on the other side of this dungeon. Ryuji spoke first. He asked what this group of adventurers was, didn't he? Feria did not hesitate to immediately say no. To explore the legendary dungeon, you need to get a special permit, which can only be issued by her father. These people got in here without permission and are exploring the dungeon illegally. They should report it. Ryuji said that illegal entry into the forbidden territory. I mean, these people are bandits or something, aren't they? He carefully examined them, or rather their weapons, which they took with them. After that, Ryuji said that they had prepared well for clearing the dungeon. These opponents are much more dangerous than the orcs, and I thought they didn't look like amateurs. They do this carefully and carefully, examining the area in their field of vision. Feria asked him what they would do with it. They will follow them or. Ryuji interrupted her and said no, apparently understanding where she was going. And he added that they would kidnap one of them and arrange an interrogation with partiality. Then he got up and went to kidnap one of them. Feria froze in surprise. While they were watching them, these suspicious people kept going further into the dungeon, not even suspecting that they had already been followed. Then one of them must have noticed something, and looked back. The guy who was walking in front of him also looked there and asked, "What is it?" To which he was told that everything was fine. He just had a feeling that something had been thrown at him. He was told not to yawn and move. This guy fell behind his team, and that's why Ryuji grabbed him, covering his mouth. This guy started kicking and asked who the hell are they. Ryuji dragged him to the shelter with Feria and pressed him against the wall, and told him to shut up. He's asking questions here, and he should answer them. He put a knife to his throat and asked if he had seen it. After that, Ryuji started asking him who they were and what they had forgotten here. Then Feria got into their conversation and said that everyone knows that this is a dungeon of legendary rank. To conquer it, a special permission of the count of this city is required. To which the guy replied that they all know it perfectly well, but they didn't come here to conquer the dungeon. And he asked, "What, aren't they dungeon robbers themselves?" Ryuji asked, "What are the robbers?" Feria realized that Ryuji didn't know this, so she immediately started explaining it to him. She told him that the robbers were former adventurers who left the guild, and who refused to invest money in it. Every adventurer is required to pay taxes every month to maintain his license and receive orders to clean up the territory. They take on everything, even illegal orders, and they do the dirtiest work. Upon hearing this, their hostage told her to take it easy with words. They're just against the guild's monopoly. Moreover, they do not always act illegally. Their current client. But then he abruptly stopped, apparently realized that he had stirred up too much. However, Ryuji already understood everything perfectly. He said that he understood. Their customer, apparently, is a man from a noble family. And I asked this guy, who is he? But before he could answer, they heard screams. He looked out of hiding and saw that their hostage's entire team was in trouble. One of them was already starting to panic and asked why. After all, they followed the map, and it led them into the lair of the orcs. The guy that Ryuji and Feria took hostage also looked out of hiding and indifferently said that they were unlucky. They were completely surrounded from all sides. Ryuji, as always, didn't say anything to anyone. Immediately darted in their direction and said that there was no choice. He turned to Feria and told her to look after the hostage, and Ryuji himself went to help them. He took out a gold coin from his pocket and squeezed it in his hand. He thought the FAMA's F1 would do for these guys. This is a French assault rifle with bullpup. This rifle immediately appeared in his hands, and then he began to shoot all the orcs that surrounded those guys. These guys were surprised, because they thought that no one and nothing would help them anymore. They looked around and asked, "What is it?" Ryuji didn't pay attention to their question. He just shouted at them to get out of here as soon as possible. Their leader was speechless for a moment, but then he pulled himself together and commanded his subordinates that they needed to get out of here as quickly as possible. After some time, when Ryuuji had dealt with all the orcs, he came back to Feria, where those robbers had already arrived. All these robbers could not catch their breath, and when their boss finally caught his breath, he turned to Ryuuji and thanked him for getting them out of this ass, and he asked that they didn't happen to. He hesitated a little and finished that they weren't robbers like them. Feria shouted that no, they were entrusted by her father, but then I realized that I had said too much and corrected myself by saying that. That is, the Count was investigating the situation in the dungeon. But the man heard everything clearly and asked what the father was. So this girl is the daughter of an earl, isn't she? Feria asked Ryuuji that she was wrong and you said yes. Ryuuji calmly told her that no, because it doesn't change much. After that, Ryuuji turned to this man and said that since they had burned them, it was better for them to honestly confess to them. They themselves came here on the order of a specific person, so why would they hide their customer? Feria was surprised and thought that what was he up to? The man agreed with Ryuuji and said that there really was no point in hiding him. And gathering his strength, he said that they were hired by the king himself, although he was thinking about not having already guessed. Ryuuji wasn't surprised at all and said that yes, that's what he thought. And Feria, unlike him, looked very surprised. She watched and listened to what they were talking about and thought that she did not understand at all what was going on here. Feria was really impressed with Ryuuji and thought that he even got out of such a situation. Ryuuji turned to Feria and asked what the king was. Feria immediately picked him up and said that his majesty is the person to whom all the cities and her father obey. He lives in the small town of Naxos. However, this is strange, because there are many other mythical dungeons where he could request an official request for exploration. Why would he hire robbers in the dungeon? This city and the dungeons were donated to the local count by their king. Does his majesty doubt his own servants? Or what? The man told her that they did not know the details for a mountain of gold. They would at least kill a local count. They don't really care how to make money. Hearing this, Feria got very angry and already pulled for her sword. But Ryuuji stopped her, told her to calm down, and ask these guys that they will do anything for money. And if so, then he hires them. Together they will reach the very depths of the dungeon. The man asked what and how much he would pay. Ryuuji said that as much as the king promised them, plus all the dropped items from the monsters. Only for the opening of the dungeon. He wants to get coins of summoning weapons, and if they fall from monsters along the way. The man thought a little and then said that it was okay. He also saved them from a bunch of orcs, so it will be extremely profitable to go with him. They shook hands and said it was done. And yet Feria didn't understand what was going on here at all. So she couldn't stand it and quietly approached Ryuuji. She asked in a whisper, what is he doing? They shouldn't get involved with these criminals. But Ryuuji had everything under control and so he told her to calm down. They don't know what the king is up to, but if they go with them, they can find out about his plans. Now Feria calmed down a little and said that she understood. After their little conversation, Ryuuji turned back to the robbers and said that he already had to go. After that, they moved on to the road. Everyone walked in silence, and no one was going to break this silence yet. Ryuuji and Feria walked in front, followed by a group of robbers. Only one of the robbers looked strange. He was staring intently ahead, either at Ryuuji or at Feria, or maybe at both of them. Their team was sitting in ambush and watching the orcs, apparently waiting for something. One said that there was a horde of orcs again. Their leader said there was no end to them. Ryuuji asked, what, is there no other way? To which the man replied that he would not. This is the only one that leads into the depths of the dungeon. Feria said that her father said that there was only one way to get there. The man asked what and what will they do now? In a fair fight, they won't beat these guys out of them. They won't be able to. Ryuuji said that he wasn't going to fight them fairly. Feria and the man looked at him questioningly. After that, they began to develop a plan and their further actions. When the plan was fully developed, one of these guys ran out and started shouting loudly to the orcs that they were here. After that, another one joined him. Now two guys were already standing and mocking them, shouting, what is it? Did they shit their pants at the sight of people? When the orcs finally paid attention to them, they immediately rushed to them. The guys got scared and ran away. One of these guys shouted that they had followed all his instructions, and now he has to do something already. Feria was standing next to Ryuuji. She watched everything that was happening and said that she had a feeling of deja vu. It seems that he used a similar tactic on the troll. Ryuuji said that's right. And in order to win, they must choose tactics where they will have a significant advantage. Battles are never fair. The man said that they would catch up with them now. Ryuuji told him to wait. He knows what he's doing, and that's why he was waiting for the right moment. And after a moment, apparently this moment has come, he said that great, now is the time. After that, the other men began to push the stones they had prepared while those two lured the orcs, and everything was going so well. Meanwhile, the orcs were right under those rocks, as Ryuji had originally intended. The rest of the orcs, who were hit by a rockfall, were shot by these guys with fireballs. The man shouted that they should shoot and not think to stop. After a while, all the orcs were defeated. Their leader praised Ryuji and said that it was not bad. Thanks to his plan, they were able to defeat all the orcs at once. Then these guys reported to their boss that many thanks to him for the comfortable escort, but then they will cope on their own. And most of this man's team, when they saw that the danger was over, rushed to the exit. Their leader did not expect this in any way, so he was at a loss and froze for a while. He didn't understand what they were talking about and called out to them. But I already saw them rushing to the aisle. The boss shouted, "What are they doing?" Ryuji didn't do anything and looked at it calmly, as if he knew that such a thing could happen. Then I saw a very familiar face and, looking closer, I realized why it was. He thought it was the same hostage, and asked, "What are the newbies?" The boss said that yes, they had not known each other before this assignment. He explained that they didn't have enough people for the building, so they hired them. Ryuji said that it was probably the royal spies. Feria asked him why did he take it? Ryuji began to mimic this man and said, as if for him, that they had hired them in a pub. Moreover, they behaved absolutely normally. They didn't even steal any items from the monsters, they just went ahead. The man intervened and said that they were just working together. Feria asked that how badly did they work that they even hired Ryuji in order to walk without casualties. The man asked her, what is she starting here? After all, they were just on the way and Ryuji interrupted him and finished for him that it was much more efficient to walk that way. The man asked what they should do now. They may have killed most of the orcs, but there are still about 10 of them left. Everyone looked to where a few orcs were still roaming. Ryuji said there was no problem. And turning to Feria, he asked if she was ready. She was determined and said that of course. Feria understood what he meant and, therefore, immediately rushed forward and asked that they were acting according to the old scheme, wasn't it? Ryuji ran ahead of her and said yes. They jumped off this cliff, and Ryuji immediately rushed into battle with the remaining orcs. When he killed one, he immediately called out to Feria. She realized that this was a signal for action, so she had already taken out her sword and said yes. After that, with her sword swing, she killed all the remaining orcs. That man came up to Ryuji and asked who the hell he was. Ryuji turned around and answered this question as always. He said he was just a soldier. After that, he picked up a gold coin that had fallen out of this orc and said that they already had to go. The man was impressed and mumbled that yes. After that, the remaining group descended the stairs lower and lower. The man walked in front, followed by Ryuji, followed by Feria, followed by several other people. Then the man said that, judging by the map, they need to come here. The whole group went down to the bottom and there they met a huge orc. It was the Orc King. Next to this orc, a system window appeared, where it was written that he was the king of the orcs and he had level 34. And also his skill was also over the strength of level 54. Everyone froze and was afraid to move. But then Feria noticed a man in the clutches of this Orc King. She couldn't stand it and said it was the same. Feria even reached for her sword, but Ryuji stopped her. It was the same man who had dumped them. The girl said that, but they have to help him. Ryuji told her that he was already dead. Apparently Feria herself was very scared. But when she saw a man in his paws, despite the fear, she decided to rush to his aid anyway. And she didn't even pay attention to how unnaturally his arms were hanging down. And the head was already completely crushed in the paws of this orc. She clenched her hand into a fist and it was obvious that her hands were shaking. Despite the fact that this man had betrayed them, she still wanted to help, but it was too late. Then the head of the robbers ran away and shouted that he was coming at them. They need to get together, because together they will be able to. But he didn't have time to finish. Apparently, he was captured by this orc. The remaining robbers were surrounded by a new army of orcs. They said there were too many of them. What should they do now? At that moment, the Orc King stepped on some big, stone button and a hatch opened nearby. Then one of them noticed a hole in the floor, and he asked, "Is this really a trap?" The Orc King chuckled and with one wave of his hand made them all fall into this trap. Those who remained upstairs said they did not hear the bodies hitting the ground. The head of the robbers, who apparently managed to escape death, looked in that direction and asked what does it mean? Ryuji said it was a very deep hole. And if they fall in there, they will be able to get out alive. Then one of these guys started to panic. He grabbed his head and started screaming. He shouted that he was satisfied with it. They're all going to die here. The man tried to calm everyone down and shouted for everyone to pull themselves together. But the guy was not going to calm down and asked him what the hell they should do. How is he going to beat him? Feria understood that it was impossible to delay any longer, so she gathered her strength and took her sword in her hands. She said she would deal with him. She crushed the coin in her hand and regained her mana. So now her strength was restored, and she was ready for battle. Feria gathered her strength and dealt a powerful blow to the Orc King. Dust had risen and therefore it was impossible to see what had happened to the Orc King. However, the Orc King emerged from the rising dust and was unharmed. There wasn't even a scratch on it. All of Feria's efforts went to waste. Feria was horrified and asked if it really didn't work. But how? She collapsed to the ground and couldn't move. The Orc King was already reaching for her with his huge paw. He's almost got her. But then Ryuji arrived in time and managed to save her, picking her up in his arms. He jumped off with her to a fairly safe distance and, putting her on the ground, asked her how she was. Feria said that she was fine and asked for forgiveness, because she had completely lost her vigilance. Ryuji turned to the head of the robbers and asked if he could distract the other orcs, at least for a couple of minutes. The man was a little puzzled, because no one wanted to sacrifice themselves, but still said that if for a couple of minutes, they could. However, what was he up to? Ryuji had already gotten up and turned his back on him, saying that he would see for himself. He looked at Feria, who was still sitting on the ground, and told her to stay here and rest. And as if anticipating her question, she said that everything would be fine with him anyway. Ryuji walked up to the Orc King and looked at him. The Orc King also looked at him and grinned. But then Ryuji threw something at him with a stone and hit him right in his eye. The Orc King did not expect this, but the grin on his face immediately disappeared. He clutched his head and growled in pain. Ryuji arrogantly apologized to him and said that, however, if he decided to raise his hand against his friend, then let him not expect mercy. The Orc King was furious. He decided to crush Ryuji, but he didn't succeed. Ryuji deftly avoided his blow. For a moment, even the Orc King lost sight of him. One of the men said that the others were going to help their king. If they can't stop them, then their kid. Then their boss shouted for them to all listen to him. They must not let them near the king. Feria herself could barely stand on her feet, but she was still very worried about Ryuji. Then the Orc King swung to hit him, but Ryuji stood still and thought that now. He crushed the coin and a mine appeared in his hands. It was an M19 anti-tank mine. Ryuji installed it, and he rushed away so that it wouldn't accidentally hit him. He thought that this heavyweight was difficult to defeat with magic alone. The Orc King lost sight of Ryuji and began to rush, because he needed to find him in order to take revenge. But then he did not notice and stepped on this mine. Then there was a big explosion. Ryuji thought that destroying the tank wasn't so easy either. After that, he got close to this Orc King and dealt a decisive blow, as he intended to throw him into this abyss. However, the Orc King managed to grab the edge of the cliff with one of his hands, so he held on. Then Ryuji picked up his knife and walked over to his huge fingers, which kept him from falling, and cut them with a knife, after which the Orc King fell down. Ryuji specially listened in order to hear the impact of the Orc King's body on the bottom of this abyss. But he said that even with such a massive body, he still doesn't hear the sound of hitting the ground. He thought that he would never have thought that the exercises on mining the territory would be useful to him in this way. Then he turned to the remaining orcs and said that when their king fell into the abyss, did they still want to fight? But despite such a loss, the orcs were still very determined. The head of the robbers was obviously pleased with this. He himself was already ready for battle, so he said that it was excellent. And he himself turned to Ryuji and told him to provide these orcs to them. Ryuji didn't stop them, so Ryuji decided to approach Feria. When he approached her, he asked her if she would be able to walk. Feria had already got up and sheathed her knife and said that yes, she had recovered her mana a little, so. Ryuji understood her, that's why he interrupted. He said go ahead then. After that, the two of them entered the next hall while the robbers fought with the orcs. Their attention was immediately attracted by what they came here for. It was the key. The two of them approached him and Ryuji asked that this was the sacred key, wasn't it? After which, he stretched out his hand in order to take it away. When the key was taken out from where it used to lie, the core of this dungeon changed color. It used to be yellow, but now it has turned blue. Feria noticed it immediately. She looked at the core of the dungeon and said that it had stabilized. The virtual assistant informed Ryuji that he had received the sacred key, and he completely cleared the legendary rank dungeon. Soon he will be awarded a new title. Ryuji asked, "What's the rank?" After a while, the virtual assistant showed him the changed characteristics. Now his title was Dungeon Conqueror of Legendary Rank. He asked Feria what, and why does he need this title at all? Feria also looked through his characteristics and, hearing this question, asked that he also got it. She explained to him that the rank proves his combat experience in this world. There are titles such as Dungeon Conqueror of Legendary Rank, Dungeon Conqueror of Mythical Rank, fencing master, dragon fighter, goblin slayer, and kama summoning master and master of the holy sword. If a person has a rank, then there is a high probability of getting more orders and a double bid. But also a person with a title respects much more than others. Ryuji listened to her carefully and said that it was understandable and thought that is, it's something like military ranks, isn't it? After that, he noticed something and said that it looks like the rank is not displayed on the person's information panel. And then how will they know who has it and who doesn't? Feria said that the guild has a qualified appraiser who records all the data in the register. When his new data is entered there, he will be given a certificate that will confirm his rank. Then the robbers came running, who dealt with the remaining orcs. They asked why they were standing there. They need to get out of here soon. After that, they all got out together. All the remaining robbers thanked Feria and Ryuji for their help. Their boss handed Ryuji in the bag and said that as he promised, all the gold coins with the summoning weapon were his. He was very happy to cooperate with him. It's always nice to have people like that. But when Ryuji took the bag in his hands, he interrupted the head of the robbers on the floor and said that this was not enough. The boss was in a stupor because he was not going to deceive him and said that they were. But Ryuji didn't let him finish again. He went up to him, said that, among other things, they didn't tell the king anything about them. If they even utter a word, then he himself. The boss interrupted him and said that he already understood him. After his fight with the Orc King, no one in their right mind would want to cross his path. Then they said goodbye and each went his own way. Feria asked him if he was sure they wouldn't tell him anything. Ryuji said they were just mercenaries hired by the king. If the king's original goal was to find the sacred key, Feria asked what if they found out about the king's true intentions. Ryuji said it made sense. Even if he finds out that they took this key, he will not announce it to the general public, because he does not. But then he saw that someone was attacking them and shouted to Feria that be careful. He grabbed the girl and pinned her to the ground. The arrow pierced the ground. Ryuji jumped to his feet and asked who was there. But then he realized that the shooter had escaped. He wondered if a mercenary had been sent for them. It looks like the king is watching them. Meanwhile, at Murabit Manor, the main hall, after all their successful adventures, Ryuji and Feria returned to the mayor of the city again. The two of them immediately went to Maru with a report. The mayor was very grateful to them for the work they had done and said that he had weakened the core of the dungeon and saved their city. He cannot express in words how grateful he is to him. Ryuji shook his head and said no thanks. What is more important? He paused briefly and remembered the words of that mercenary who said that as they guessed, they were hired by the king himself. And he also remembered about the shooting man, who tried to kill them with arrows, and he told Meru about it all. The mayor looked puzzled, but not surprised. He asked that this was how they met the mercenaries in the dungeon. Ryuji said that moreover, they claimed that they were sent here by the king himself. The mayor thought for a moment. Feria said she was surprised by it herself. But this is generally possible. Then the mayor said that there are rumors that other nations want to attack their state. His daughter asked what she was doing. The mayor said that monsters are coming out of the dungeons more and more often. There are becoming too many of them. Not only civilians are suffering, but also their agriculture. Many aspects suffer from the appearance of so many monsters. His daughter said it wasn't the answer. Ryuji thought that in this world, wars and people's plans never change. The mayor of the city continued that the king wanted to take possession of the mythical dungeon. He wanted to do this to fulfill his cherished desire. Ryuji asked, "What are the wishes?" The mayor said that in order not to incite even more wars, he wants to become the only king. Feria rolled her eyes. She was very surprised by this statement of the king. Feria said it was crazy, after all. To which Mer said that the gods in the mythical dungeon could well fulfill this request. A lot of blood will be shed to achieve this goal. Such ideas had already haunted him when he was an advisor to the king. But, apparently, he did not give up trying to achieve this dream. Ryuji, with his still calm expression, said that it was understandable. After he thought a little and again said that, apparently, that's why he hired a gang of robbers, so as not to show his involvement in this. The mayor agreed with him and said that most likely this is exactly the case. In the past, he had already tried to convey to his majesty how crazy this idea was. And even if he comes to him again with such a conversation, he will not listen to him. He knows how crazy his request will sound. But he asks him to capture the mythical dungeon first of all, his majesty. Ryuji wasn't going to refuse, so he said that of course. After all, the mythical dungeon was his original goal. After this conversation with the mayor of the city, Feria and Ryuji went to the cemetery. Feria laid flowers on the grave and bowed. Apparently it was her mother or a close relative. And then, when it was already getting dark, they immediately went on their way. The mayor of the city stood at the entrance to the estate and saw them off. It was already late at night when they finally arrived at the motel, where they decided to spend the night today. Ryuji went outside to Feria, who was kind of drooping. She just sat silently on the bench. She was looking at the night sky. Then Ryuji came up to her and asked her why she couldn't sleep. Feria immediately started up and said that she was thinking about going to the mythical dungeon tomorrow. Ryuji sat down next to her and asked her that she knew she didn't have to go with him if she didn't want to. But Feria was determined and, of course, she understood this, but she did not consider such an option. She told him not to talk like that, because she had already decided everything. She's here because she wants to help him. Her mom was always telling her to find a good friend and follow him. And now she has finally found the person she wants to follow. So she's not going to leave him on the way to the goal. Ryuji, although he showed it, but he was surprised by Feria's words. And he thought that he didn't think he was a good person. And then he said that her mom, Feria, understood what she wanted to say. So she interrupted and said that she had very poor health. After the war, she died suddenly. And I asked him what about his parents? Surely they are also waiting for his return. Does he miss them? Ryuji still calmly said that, unfortunately, his parents died when he was still a child. Feria felt uncomfortable, so she hurriedly apologized to him for putting up such a topic. Ryuji told her not to take it into her head. A lot of things happened in his life, but eventually he became a soldier. He met a lot of good people from different countries. They shared a shelter with them and learned from each other everything new and unusual. And eventually they became a real family for him. After he told her all this, Ryuji got up from the bench and said that he thought they needed to wrap up. They have to get up early tomorrow, because they have a lot of important things to do. So they went to their rooms. In the morning they went to the city where the dungeon they needed was. When they finally arrived in the right city, everything was a little different than in Reborn. They wandered through the deserted streets. And then Ryuji said that such a huge city, but there are so few people here. Feria agreed with him and said that it was true. It was really very quiet here. There were no children running noisily through the streets, as in Reborn. No adults, no merchants who would sell their goods everywhere. Feria noticed a man behind the counter and said that, most likely, this happened because the city is located next to a mythical dungeon. Monsters began to gradually leave the dungeon, so it became unsafe to stay here. Ryuji thought about it and asked that after they solve this problem with the dungeon, then they will return back to the city. Feria said that most likely, while they were talking about it, they had already come to the mythical dungeon, which was also called the Dragon King Dungeon. However, they had to hide behind a tree, as there was a whole cavalry in front of the entrance to this dungeon. Feria was very surprised by this and said that it was the cavalry of King Naxos. Then another detail caught her attention, which she could not ignore. Feria told Ryuji to take a look. They looked at two people and said that it was a sacred key. The commander of this army was given a key and told that this was the sacred key as he had been waiting for. The commander accepted it and said that it was fine. So now they need to start capturing. They must be vigilant. After that, they came to the doors of this dungeon, and the commander used his key to open them. When the doors were open, the whole army went inside. 2 knights were left outside this dungeon, who monitored the whole situation outside, apparently so that no outsider could get inside. Feria was shocked by this situation and asked why the Naxos cavalry needed a consecrated key. Despite all this unpleasant situation, Ryuji still remained calm and said that His Majesty the Emperor, in order to obtain the sacred key, instructed a team of thieves to explore the mythical dungeon. Feria asked him if he was sure. Ryuji firmly said yes, because that's what he was told. It looks like they got it another way, or they found the key in some kind of storage. Anyway, only one thing is clear, they were ahead of them. Feria asked him that they would chase them and force their way in, didn't they? Ryuji said that only as a last resort. However, it will be very difficult for them with so many people. But then they tensed up, because they heard some rustling in the bushes and immediately pulled away from this place and grabbed their weapons, about to draw it. Both were already ready to attack. Ryuji resolutely asked that who is here. But then Feria noticed some movement and immediately reacted. She immediately drew her sword and aimed at this man. After that, the man was pressed against a tree with a sword. The man was scared. He held his hands up and asked them to stop. Feria said they had seen him recently, and it was exactly like that. It was the same man they had seen behind the counter in the deserted city. So they decided to give him a chance, decided to listen to him. The man apologized to them for watching, and explained to them that it was for the cause. Feria still hadn't lowered her sword, apparently still didn't trust. She asked him what his business was. What is he talking about? The man began to explain everything to them in order and said that he was a pharmacist by profession. He buys ingredients from adventurers and makes magic potions. But recently, good materials have not been coming to the capital. Feria said that the dungeon just became active. Then Feria finally put away her sword. Apparently, she was convinced that he would not harm them and he had no bad intentions. And she added that similar shipments were stopped. The man said that yes, that's exactly it. She's absolutely right. That's why he was looking for a new way to get the materials. Ryuji asked that, and that's why he was chasing them, wasn't it? The man explained it in such a way that such a traitor's intuition. Ryuji and Feria looked at him warily. The man saw the doubts in their eyes, which is why he hurried to say that it was honest. And they also want to get into a mythical dungeon. He's right, isn't he? Feria asked him if he really knew how they could do it. The man said that after all, merchants have a lot of different connections. He knows the back entrance to the dungeon, and he can show it to them. Ryuji understood that everything was not just like that, and therefore asked him what he was asking in return. The man smiled and said that they should sell him materials from the mythical dungeon. Rayon immediately assured them that he would buy them at a fair price. Feria wanted to say something, but the man interrupted her, apparently figured out what exactly she wanted to say, probably the trader's intuition again, and said that only she did not say that he should contact the guild. Okay. He explained that this is problematic because the guild has a monopoly. Ryuji didn't argue with him and said that it was fine, so now he had to show them the back door. The man immediately perked up and said that they needed to come here. After some time, they came to the right place. Feria carefully examined the place and called out to Ryuji. Ryuji said yes. It seems that they have learned to understand each other without words. He took out his key and opened the gate. After that, the two of them went inside, and the man finally shouted to them that he wished them good luck. After they left, a strange girl appeared next to this man, who shot at them last time. The man was not at all surprised by her arrival, since they already knew each other, and asked her that she was sure it was worth letting them go there. The girl said it was okay. They are irrelevant. The dungeon was huge. There were very high ceilings and narrow passages. Feria said that here in the mythical dungeon, the magic is so strong that she feels like she is about to be crushed. She asked him how does he stay so calm? Ryuji told her that there were no signs of the enemy, that nothing interfered with his actions. Feria was already slowly getting used to him, so his answer did not surprise her very much and said that it was understandable. Ryuji said that since they were able to enter the dungeon, then why do they need the key of another dungeon at all? The girl said that it was just accepted. She never thought about it. Then the virtual assistant intervened and said that he could answer this question. Feria was frightened and, reaching for her sword, asked who he was. Ryuji stopped and turned around and asked if she had heard that. The girl said yes, of course. Then he asked, "What, have you ever heard of this before?" To which she replied that no, it was the first time. To begin with, I looked around and asked what does it mean? What's going on now? Ryuji also looked around and asked, who is he? The virtual assistant said that he could finally show himself. Still, if the magic is not as strong as here, then it is very difficult to materialize. After that, a girl appeared in front of them and greeted them. She said that the heavenly voice, the goddess Nyx, had not visited them, although this goddess Nyx was more like a child in build. When the goddess Nyx appeared in front of them and saw the sword that was pointed at her, she screamed in fright. Feria was also scared and asked who she was. Suddenly came out of nowhere. So she's some kind of ghost monster. Goddess Nyx hid behind Ryuji, who was still standing with a stony face, and told her that she just misunderstood her. The goddess Nyx turned to Ryuji in order for him to explain it to her somehow. Then Feria turned to him and asked him if he really knew who she was. Ryuji still stood with a stony face and calmly said that no, he didn't know her. Then Feria attacked her again with a sword and said that she was an enemy after all. Seeing this sword again, Goddess Nyx started screaming loudly again. But then Ryuji began to slowly understand, and he thought that this was the strange voice that he had first heard when he came to this world. This so-called heavenly voice spoke to him in his native language, and told him about this world, didn't you? At first he thought he was just crazy, and when he remembered all this, he still calmly said that he thought she was Feria. And now it turns out that this is not true. This goddess Nyx finally managed to breathe and said that of course. She explains once again that she is the goddess Nyx, one of the many gods of this world. Feria asked what they wanted to say, that a real god appeared in front of them, didn't she? Ryuji decided to ask Feria, because she understands this better since she lives in this world, and asked her that. By the way, Nyx is a famous goddess. Feria did not even think twice and said that no, this is the first time she hears them. Ryuji said it was clear, so she was from the lower gods. Goddess Nyx was offended and said that she actually hears everything. Feria turned to her and asked her to listen to her. The goddess Nyx looked at her and asked, "What is it?" Feria immediately became very serious and asked that she had brought Ryuuji into this world. But for what? The goddess Nyx did not know how to tell them about it better and said that how to say it. There are 10 mythical rank dungeons in this world, so she called him to clean them out. In every dungeon there is a god who heads it. This dragon god dungeon is controlled by Fafnir. The surrounding dungeon is controlled by his entourage, or demons that are under his control. Feria said that the mythical class and legendary class dungeons under Radom are also associated with this kind of gods. That is why the sacred key is located in the deepest part of Radom. Ryuuji supported her thought and said that's why she lets him clean up in a mythical dungeon. But what does she want to achieve in the end? But at that moment, without saying a word, Ryuuji abruptly pushed the goddess Nyx away. Goddess Nyx raised her head and was a little confused by such an act. She sat up and asked what had happened, because she hadn't said anything strange. But then she realized everything. A huge monster appeared in front of her. It was a level 59 wyvern. Her skill was level 68 dragon breath. Ryuuji told her to move away. Feria asked him to wait. Ryuuji stopped and began to listen to her attentively and at the same time look at the monster. Feria looked at the goddess Nyx and asked that couldn't a god defeat such an opponent much faster. Ryuuji also thought about it and said that it was possible. However, the goddess Nyx shook her head negatively and said no. The forces of her material form are very small, so she won't be able to lift a stone here. Then Ryuuji told them again that it meant they had to move away. He immediately began to evaluate his opponent. Ryuuji thought it would be difficult to fight a flying monster, but the flight needs a good start, and if he doesn't give him that chance, he will destroy him. So that's exactly what he decided to do. With the help of his magic, he accelerated and in the blink of an eye was right at this monster. He jumped up and said that's it. Then he saw something strange on the body of this monster and thought, what is this bulge? He shouted to Feria to run. After which, this dragon spewed flames. Feria managed to move away, but she did not notice that she had moved too far from the center and there was no floor under her, so Feria began to fall. Ryuuji saw it right away and rushed to her aid, but he did not have time to grab her hand, and the girl fell down. Feria was flying down and thought that she would definitely crash. She needs to calm down. After that, she took out her swords and, activating it, destroyed the ground beneath her. Then she landed successfully. She exhaled and said that she had somehow escaped. True, she had used up all her magic. It will be bad if she gets monsters. And then what she was afraid happened. Ryuuji was furious. He was angry with himself because he couldn't save Feria. He clenched his hand into a fist with all his strength and hit the floor. However, it's not time to give up yet. He can't afford it, because the monster has not been defeated yet. But then he looked down and saw an explosion and thought, is this really Feria's magic? It looks like she's fine. After seeing this, he now felt a little calmer as he realized that Feria should be fine. At that moment, the terrified goddess Nyx began to call him. He got up and said that first, he has to deal with this monster. It's a dragon, still spewing flames. Goddess Nyx was very scared and held on to the first thing that came to hand. The gusts of wind were so strong that if the goddess Nyx did not hold on, she would easily be blown away. The only thing that didn't change in such a situation was Ryuji's expression and calmness. He said it was great. She must keep distracting him. The goddess Nyx asked him with a claim that it was nothing, that it was cruel to her. Ryuji said there was nothing she could do about it, because she couldn't fight. And he asked that since she was a god, it probably wasn't that easy to kill her, was it? The goddess Nyx said that although she is a god, she is afraid of terrible things. Ryuji didn't answer her. Apparently he had a plan ready, so he just rushed to deal with the monster. Goddess Nyx asked what is out of sight, but he still didn't pay attention to her. Ryuji stopped by this dragon and thought that most creatures' bellies are a weak spot. He carefully examined this monster and thought that, however, he had the main organ for breathing in his throat, so he had to get there. He rushed straight to him. Meanwhile, the dragon was also not going to stand still. At the moment, he was trying to take off. Ryuji realized this and thought that he couldn't get on the tail with his breath, so he's doing the right thing by flying away. Ryuji pushed off from the ground and, jumping up, plunged the knife directly into the body, or rather into the throat, his weak spot. And I slit his throat, blood gushed out. So Ryuji, addressing this dragon, said that, however, it was too late. The dragon growled in pain. A strong wave of air gushed out of the dragon's throat. Ryuji covered his face with his hands and asked if all the accumulated breaths were being blown out of him. This breath was so strong that even the goddess Nyx could not resist and blew her down. And Ryuji jumped off himself, apparently rushed to Feria's aid. So he picked up goddess Nyx and threw her over his shoulder. The goddess Nyx kept screaming. She clung to Ryuji and started screaming that they were all going to die. Ryuji didn't react to her screams in any way. However, it wasn't as scary as she thought. Eventually, they landed neatly, thanks to Ryuji, on one of the pillars that were all around the perimeter of this wall. Ryuji placed her on this support and told her calmly to calm down. He explained to her that he looked down and saw this support. Goddess Nyx was still scared and shouted that God. At least he would have warned her then. The system window with his characteristics appeared in front of Ryuji again. Oh studied them carefully and thought that his level had risen again. Now his level was 28. His style was level 8 melee. His health was 449 out of 470. He turned to the Goddess Nyx and called out to her. Goddess Nyx was still shaking with fear and could not come to her senses. She asked what. Ryuji said that after defeating this dragon, his level rose. The Goddess Nyx stood next to him in order to also look at the system window, and then Ryuji asked her if she would report it, as was usual. Goddess Nyx was still apparently impressed by the fight with this monster and asked what. But he also realized what Ryuji meant, and she, standing behind him, began to shout that the level had risen, and health was completely restored. Ryuji stood with a stony face and said how noisy she was. If she doesn't need to say anything else, then let her not say anything. And he himself went to the edge of this support and began to look at what was below, apparently trying to find Feria there in order to rush to save her. Goddess Nyx was offended and asked what, but she promised. Then Ryuji, in order to shut her up, said that she would attract even more monsters with her screams. Then the Goddess Nyx covered her mouth with her palm so as not to scream anymore and said that she was silent. After that, when Ryuji carefully examined the entire wall, they calmly began to descend the semaphores down. Then the Goddess Nyx told him that, however, this was exactly what the gods wanted. They wanted to defeat the wyvern without magic. Ryuji told her that he didn't seem to be able to use magic, so he can't help it. The Goddess Nyx, hearing this, was surprised and asked what. He's not joking, is he? At that moment, Ryuji stopped at one of the pillars and told her that he thought she knew it. When they were on their way to the royal capital, Feria explained to him that magic has 4 elements, such as air and fire, water and earth. One who has magical abilities must first master fire in order to test whether he can use magic at all. Ryuji asked her why is fire magic coming first? To which Feria replied that fire is always with a person, but it cannot be created without wanting it. It is most suitable for using magic. That's what they say, senior cleaners of this world. They also created fire first. Ryuji listened carefully and said that it was clear. He remembered their conversation with Feria and now said, Goddess Nyx, that no matter how many times he tried to use fire magic, nothing came of it. He has a lot of mana, but he can't use magic. It seems that he is like that by nature. After listening to him, the Goddess Nyx laughed and said that he was wrong. Ryuji didn't understand her and asked if he was wrong. Goddess Nyx confirmed and said that yes, this is exactly the case, because this is a human error. Agony magic doesn't have to be the first. Each person's magical abilities are different. Ryuji pricked up his ears again and asked, is this really true? And he himself thought that if this is so, then it turns out that he can also use magic, right? While Ryuji was discussing all this with the Goddess Nyx, and also went down to help Feria, Feria herself was at that time fighting with the monsters that overtook her at the very bottom of this dungeon. These monsters were very similar to huge purple worms. Feria wielded her sword very deftly and had already hacked most of them. She was already noticeably exhausted, barely able to stand on her feet. But she wasn't going to give up either. However, this monster caught her by surprise and grabbed her from behind. Since she was keen on fighting from the front, she didn't notice the catch from behind. This worm wrapped around her tacks and did not let go. He began to pull her along. Feria resisted with all her might, but it didn't help her. She screamed for him to let her go. Since Feria had no strength left, she could not escape. She was very scared. Feria understood that she was in a desperate situation and she could not count on Ryuji's help either, but still she could not give up. These worms dragged her further and further behind them, and then she saw where they were pulling her. It was a huge, nasty worm, in the mouth of which there were many sharp teeth, and even in several rows. And also all those thin, long tentacles of his came out of the mouth. Feria was desperate and called Ryuji for help. Feria was in a desperate situation. As she had run out of strength, she could no longer resist this monster. The only thing she could do was call for Ryuji's help. But still, she herself was not going to give up so easily. She stuck her sword into the ground and, grabbing it, tried to get up and said that she could not die here. She had great faith in Ryuji and said that he would definitely come and save her. And until then, she needs to somehow But then she didn't have time to finish, as this monster grabbed her with its tentacles and with all his strength already began to drag her to him. Here, all attempts to resist Feria were useless. The monster tore her off the ground and began to pull her inside in order to devour her. She understood that she was in a desperate situation, but she was still not going to give up. The monster grabbed her, so she couldn't even move. Feria looked straight into the mouth of this monster and saw all the rows of its sharp, huge teeth, and also the saliva that flowed. So Feria couldn't stand it anymore and started screaming. But someone came to her rescue and cut off all the tentacles that held the girl. Feria closed her eyes and flew down, but she was picked up. When she opened her eyes, she was very surprised and delighted, because Ryuji was in front of her. Ryuji held her in his arms and told her that she was holding up very well. Since they were reunited again, the two of them now began to resist this monster with their probes. Feria asked him what, and where is the goddess Nyx? Ryuji didn't understand her or pretended that he didn't understand her and asked what the goddess was. And then he told her that it was a very long time to move around with her, so he left her there. Feria was horrified and said that she was still a god. Ryuji translated and said that this huge monster was waiting for them. So it looks like they won't be able to go any further until they defeat him. Ryuji looked very focused and added that there was no other way out. Feria asked him what she was, how could they beat him? Ryuji confidently stepped forward and told her to trust him. Fearless, he rushed straight at this monster with all his legs. Along the way, the monster tried to stop him with its remaining tentacles, but Ryuji deftly jumped over and avoided all these so-called obstacles. He moved very deftly and quickly, however. He did not notice that a monster was going to attack him from behind. But Feria noticed this and decided to warn Ryuji. However, Ryuji didn't need it, because he had everything very well thought out. He deftly avoided the attack of this tentacle and did what he hoped for. It turns out that Ryuji didn't just avoid the attack of these tentacles, he made them all entangled in one huge ball. And now this worm alone would not be able to untangle them. Feria looked a little surprised and thought he had tangled his tentacles. She was really surprised by this, because she didn't expect such a thing from Ryuji. And now he was already preparing for a new attack. He took out a gold coin from his pocket and squeezed it with such force that it broke into pieces. And then he rushed into battle again and told this monster that since he was hungry, then let him taste this, and threw a few grenades into his mouth. This devil swallowed them all, and then there was a huge explosion. The worm was torn apart. Then the goddess Nyx appeared next to Feria. She exhaled and said that she was finally able to catch up with them. How terrible that Ryuji had left her there alone. She interrupted her speech because she saw the monster and screamed that he would eat them. Ryuji came up behind her and told her to calm down, because he was already dead. The goddess Nyx looked at him and asked, "What?" Feria looked very sad, and she lowered her head, turned to them and asked for forgiveness. She felt very guilty about something. Ryuji really didn't understand what she was apologizing for and asked what for what. Feria clenched her palm into a fist and said that for adding to his problems. And she also lost coins for summoning weapons. Hearing such a reason, Ryuji told her calmly that it was okay. Ryuji looked at the gold coins that were lying right behind Feria and that fell from that monster and said that there were even more of these coins anyway. After that, he looked at a closed door nearby and said that yes, and this path seems to be the right one. After that, all three of them went into the new door. It was a very spacious hall where they also encountered several monsters. And now they were fighting the bats, but together, so things were going much faster. The only thing is that the goddess Nyx kept getting scared and running away from these monsters. After a short time, they were still able to defeat the huge bat. The goddess Nyx stood next to them and clapped her hands. Then they went to the next hall, where they were met by another monster. But they easily defeated him, too. This time, the last blow was struck by Feria with her sword on the throat of this monster. Then their path was clear, so they walked calmly. Ryuji walked in front, followed by Feria. The most recent one flew to goddess Nyx. She kept looking around at something, so I was constantly lagging behind them. The first one to break the silence was Ryuji, who said that there really are a lot of different monsters in the mythical dungeon. Feria walked beside him with her head down, apparently still feeling guilty. Apparently, for a long time she could not muster the courage, nevertheless turned to him and asked what, and she did not consider her a burden. Ryuji stopped, turned to her and said that absolutely not. Feria didn't believe him anyway, or she doubted herself to such an extent. She said that but she couldn't muster the courage to say what she wanted. Then Ryuji decided to say that if it were so. He pointed to the goddess Nyx, who was not doing anything right now, but was just idling, and asked what she was then. Despite the fact that the goddess Nyx was in her thoughts, she heard them well and said that she was useful. They should be grateful to her just for the fact that she just exists. Ryuji exhaled and told her that she shouldn't be praising herself so much. Hearing this, the goddess Nyx got angry and, turning to him, asked what. Ryuji paid no attention to the goddess Nyx and turned back to Feria, and told her that there was no point in asking for things that were not on the battlefield. He spoke quite seriously and said that she herself, her comrades, the enemy on the field. She must do the best she can in the conditions that are given to her. Feria said that she understands all this, but apparently I still feel guilty for what happened. Ryuji looked at her carefully, and then said that when she was captured by the goblins, she didn't give up and continued to support the children. Didn't she? Feria said that, and asked what, but so what? Ryuji continued on his way and told her that this was the most important thing on the battlefield. In order to survive, you need to have an indestructible heart. For a moment, Feria froze in surprise. Here this hall, in which they were walking, had already come to an end and was moving on to the next one. One was the goddess Nyx. She looked out and said that it seemed there was an exit to a large space. She walked to the edge of the abyss and looked down, but something threw her into a very strong horror. She staggered back a few steps. Ryuji noticed this and asked her what is it, but the goddess Nyx could not utter a word. Then Ryuji and Feria walked to the edge of the cliff themselves and looked down. Ryuji's face didn't change from what he saw, but Feria's face was filled with horror. No one could say a word. On the days of this abyss there were huge spikes that pierced the bodies of all those soldiers who came here earlier. Feria and Ryuji immediately remembered the army they had met at the main entrance to the dungeon. They thought it was the same warriors who entered the dungeon, and they entered here before them. Goddess Nyx was still shaking with terror, so she was even barely moving, and she said that something very terrible had happened. Feria was also terrified. She wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, and told Ryuji that they had better go back. It's too dangerous here. Ryuji had already turned around and was about to walk back. He even supported Feria's idea and said yes. But when he turned around and was about to leave, he noticed something and clucked with displeasure. Feria heard this and asked him if something had really happened. Ryuji said that it was obvious that they had no choice but to move on. Feria didn't understand what he was asking. What? However, when she also turned around and saw what Ryuji saw, her pupils narrowed in horror. The exit from this terrible place was now blocked by the same spikes that pierced the bodies of this entire army, so now they had no way back. They could only go ahead and deal with this monster who had done this. So the whole trio moved on, because they had nothing else to do. They descended from the top and began to make their way through the corpses of these warriors. Goddess Nyx, as always, walked behind, and Ryuji was the very first, followed by Feria, also looking around like the goddess Nyx. The goddess Nyx's hair stood on end on her head. She could not even, as usual, rattle without stopping. She only asked them if they were sure it would be safe to walk here, and I would really like to be pierced. Ryuji looked around and said that these warriors were not stuck down here, they were thrown off a high bridge. The goddess Nyx was even slow to think out of fear, and that's why she asked him what he meant by that. Ryuji was the only one who still held on and kept his composure and said that as long as they were not at the top, then everything would be fine. The goddess Nyx said she understood him. Although they had no other way, they could only go forward. The goddess Nyx said that then she could be, but she didn't have time to finish, as her huge paws dragged her somewhere. This monster grabbed her and took off. The goddess Nyx could only scream. Ryuji looked at this monster that was walking away with their goddess and asked if she was definitely a goddess. Feria, I told him they needed to catch up with them, and was about to give chase. However, Ryuji wasn't going to rush right away and thought, where did this dragon come from? He didn't even notice any footprints, so I had no choice but to rush to the aid of their goddess Nyx. Feria ran behind and said it was the dragon that turned the other way. She also noticed that there was just a disgusting evil energy that emanated from his body. Is this the master of this dungeon? It was Fafnir, the dragon god. They were still running, they couldn't catch up with them in any way. Then Ryuji called her, and he said that Nyx had told him something. He remembered her saying that she had told him that fire magic didn't have to be one. Each person's magical abilities are different from each other, and now Ryuji told Feria what he thought back then. That doesn't it seem to her that she is the best at water magic? Feria froze for a moment and asked what. Ryuji looked at her and said what he was guessing based on the way she was moving her sword. He would say that such are more suitable for flowing, running water than for raging fire. Hearing this, Feria blushed all over. She was going to catch up with him and asked what, but why was he telling her all this? Ryuji said that he had told her that on the battlefield she should do everything in her power, in the conditions that would be given to her, and he doesn't know what will happen next. However, they must do their best. Feria said he was right. The dragon god flew into the next hall, where Feria and Ryuji ran. It was then that the dragon god released the goddess Nyx. Ryuji said that it looked like she was fainting. The dragon god looked at the goddess Nyx and then decided to destroy them all with his flame. Ryuji shouted at Feria that he was approaching so that he had to run. They were both able to dodge his attack. Feria pulled on her sword and said she would distract him and let him attack him. Ryuji said he understood. After Feria's attack, Ryuji thought that the excellent dragon god was now stunned, so it's about time. After which, he attacked this dragon. The dragon fell to the ground. Feria ran up to him and said that they could. But Ryuji didn't answer her, he just thought it was very strange. It's too suspicious. There is no reaction. Maybe it's his handling of magic, or maybe it's that he's gotten better. But still, is he weaker than the dragon he defeated earlier? Definitely not. And this dragon opened his eyes. The floor under him began to crumble and a lot of dust rose, so that no one could see what was happening there now. The only thing that was clear was that nothing good would happen next. A strong shaking began and then everyone tensed up. Ryuji told Feria to run away from here. He looked at the goddess Nyx, who had already woken up from fainting, and said that Nyx should also run away from here. Now a dragon has appeared and much more. He told them that he really hoped that it would be more fun with him than with all these weaklings. This was the first mythical class dungeon of the Dragon God dungeon. The guardian beast Fafnir appeared. Upon seeing him, Feria and the goddess Nyx froze in horror. A real dragon god appeared in front of them. Feria was trembling with fear and said that it was Fafnir. This is the guardian of the dragon god's dungeon. I even fell down from fear and thought that it was simply impossible. They definitely won't beat him. However, Ryuji was very determined. This dragon god could even speak. He sighed and said that he thought what a strange feeling it was. But it seems there is a traitor among them. And he looked at the goddess Nyx. Ryuji asked her what it meant. Goddess Nyx had already started to speak, but she faltered. The dragon god laughed out loud and said it was stupid. Challenged them, the 10 pillars. And in the end, they all relied on the person. Ryuji didn't understand what was going on here. He just stood there and said nothing. He asked the goddess Nyx if he would be able to return to his world. What is the goddess Nyx for then? He was told that it was possible, but there are 10 mythical dungeons in this world, and all these dungeons will need to be cleared by him. Ryuji sighed now and said that it was clear to him. Feria still didn't get to her feet and asked him what was clear to him. Ryuji said that he doesn't know all these details, but he believes that this means that the gods are also in conflict with each other. The dragon god was surprised and told him that, and he turns out to be a smart person. And it looks like he's even very strong, isn't it? Little dragons began to fly around this dragon god, which made his appearance become more and more terrible. However, Ryuji was not intimidated by this. He was still fearlessly standing right at his paws. Then the dragon god, realizing his power, said that it was better to let him be his servant, and then he will be able to fulfill his every wish. Seeing so many dragons, the girls were very scared. Ryuji was silent for a moment, after which he said that he had one question. The dragon god said he was listening to him. Ryuji said that if he agreed and became his servant, would he be able to return to his world? When the dragon god heard this, he got angry and asked him, what is his world? Everything is clear to him now. They're all traitors. Now he had already turned to the goddess Nyx and said that she had summoned a man from another world in order for him to fight against them. Ryuji still stood unshaken and thought that it was obvious that there were 2 powers of the gods. Fafnir was one of the 10 pillars, and it looks like, as Ryuji thinks, is the ruling class. He looked at the goddess Nyx and thought that there was also Nyx from the rebels, as in any other world, Ryuji believes. However, he did not have time to finish his thought, as the dragon god interrupted him and said that he was very sorry. However, it is extremely difficult to return to your world. And in order to fulfill this wish, he will have to clear the mythical dungeons. And he will also have to defeat all the gods of the 10 pillars. And a person is clearly not able to do this. He asked him that what does his past world matter at all? Ryuji didn't understand what he was asking him and asked what. The dragon god explained to him that he had nothing to hope for there. Wealth, popularity, it will all become. Does he understand it? But then the goddess Nyx could no longer listen to this and screamed that she could not. She turned directly to Ryuji and continued to say that although it is really very difficult to clear all the dungeons of the mythical level, and sometimes she even thinks about joining the 10 pillars, it will be much better and more profitable. She fell to the ground and started crying, saying that, however, Ryuji apparently understood what she wanted to say, and turned away from her, told her, I'm sorry. Goddess Nyx froze in anticipation of what Ryuji would tell her now, and Ryuji said he was giving up on it. The dragon god asked him if he was really challenging them. Ryuji firmly said that this is exactly the case. Has he seen enough here already? He has also seen people who accept similar offers and attach their own people. He saw them regret it afterwards, and he's not going to betray his friends. Goddess Nyx and Feria, hearing his words, were surprised. They didn't know what they had to say, so they just kept quiet. And Ryuji finished his thought, said that he was not in the past world, nor in this one. The dragon god said that everything was clear to him, and he thought there was still hope. What fools people are after all. But if that's the case, then they should all die. Now the god of the gorse was angry with them, so now nothing could stop him. And after his order, all the dragons that were flying around him rushed to kill Ryuji, Goddess Nyx and Feria. Ryuji immediately decided to take the full blow on himself, and that's why he was the first to rush into battle. He managed to evade this attack, so everything was going well so far. He moved chaotically. Apparently, he was only hatching his plan in the course of further actions. However, the dragon god wasn't going to stop there. Thorns appeared on the way of people, the same ones that all the soldiers of the royal army were overcome with. Apparently, from the very beginning, the dragon god blocked all their escape routes, but I also easily avoided their backpacks. However, the dragon god was also very stubborn and was not going to back down, and more spikes appeared. But even so, Ryuji managed to dodge, even though it was harder now. Feria was very worried about him. Ryuji himself knew that he would not be enough for a long time, and he thought that dragons and earth magic were just a distraction. And then this dragon god waved his tail in order to attack Ryuji. This time he couldn't come back, and that's why he took such a risky step. In this situation, he had to block his attack. He put his hand up for the block, however, he couldn't resist. The dragon god threw him a long enough distance. Feria didn't see what happened next, but she saw a lot of blood. She started crying and rushed to Ryuji's aid, shouting his name. There was a strong collapse from this shock wave, and since there was a lot of dust, Feria couldn't see what happened to Ryuji. The dragon god was already very disappointed and said how boring it was. Is that really all he's capable of? Only the little ones and the traitor remained. Then he looked in their direction, and he told them that he was going to kill them now. Feria was already ready to grab her sword and start a battle with the dragon god, although she understood that the chances were small. But the goddess Nyx grabbed her hand and pulled her along. Feria did not immediately react, as everything happened very quickly, and yet she asked the goddess Nyx what she was doing. Goddess Nyx said that of course she was running away. Did she really think she could beat him? Feria knew she was telling the truth. Goddess Nyx told her that so she should run. The goddess Nyx began to reproach herself and said that how could she have drawn people into the quarrel of the gods. She felt guilty for her actions and said she shouldn't have done it. At least, definitely not hers. She was still pulling Feria along. Feria herself was at a loss, but then the side of the dragons showed up again and asked if they really hoped to escape. And then he prepared himself for the attack. He absorbed the air and turned it into a flame, which he wanted to direct directly at the girls. With his own flame, he also destroyed dragons from his subjects. But still, Feria managed to push the goddess Nyx so that the two of them would not be touched by fire. But the shock wave was still very strong, and they both fell. The dragon god said that people are so small, they are so difficult to aim at. Feria was surprised by his antics and said that he kills even his own dragons so easily. The dragon god, addressing them, said that they should surrender. After all, they still have no time to run. Then Feria found the strength. She stood up and said that in other words there was nothing left but to defeat him, wasn't there? She was even more determined now. After hearing her statement, the dragon god was silent for a moment, and then burst into loud laughter. He told her that yes, she was just crazy with fear. How would she fight him with her worthless magic? The goddess Nyx still did not get up and, panting with fear, said that that was it. Even Ryuji couldn't handle him. Doesn't she understand that? Feria had already drawn her sword, pointed it directly at the benefit of the dragons and said that she was not going to give up anyway. The dragon god said it was fine. Then she will realize her helplessness and die. He will die in utter despair. Feria wasn't scared at all. His words were only addressed to Nyx. She told her to hold her or the body, and she will guide her. Goddess Nyx wrapped her around her waist and did as she told her. The goddess Nyx has already taken off with Feria. Then she got scared and shouted that he had given it away, they were going to crash. But Feria was very determined and wasn't going to give up so easily, and that's why she told her sternly to dodge. She should dodge to the right now. Then she asked her to the left, and then from above. So the two of them overcame all the obstacles on their way, and they got close to the dragon god in general and unharmed. Apparently, she had a plan. She flew up to the dragon god, but she wasn't going to attack him right away. The dragon god watched their movements carefully and said that everything was clear to him. They were originally aiming for the sacred treasures, but from his intonation, it could be said that he was not surprised at all and said that what else could be expected from people, although he himself did not intend to give everything to them so simply. So he took air again and I attacked them with an air attack. The girls didn't expect this, so they fell down. The dragon god landed next to the headlight and said that well, the goddess Nyx wasn't hit as hard as Feria, so she was fully conscious. She shouted to her that the dragon she should immediately run away from here. Feria was already barely moving. But still, the first thing she did when she regained consciousness was to tighten her grip on her sword. She tried to get up and thought, is that really all? But it can't be that way. At that moment, Na remembered all the words Ryuji had said to her, only on the way to the dragon god. He then told her that she should do everything in her power, and she understands it perfectly, so she was not going to give up now and was getting up. She remembered that Ryuji had asked her back then if she didn't think she was the best at water magic. Apparently, now she is seriously thinking about it. Although there she really was very surprised by this. But now she decided to take his advice. So now she decided to concentrate and apply her water magic. And she did it. Even Goddess Nyx didn't expect this, so she just watched in silence. No one said a word during the whole time of Feria's concentration, when everyone seemed to be frozen in anticipation and watched with interest for further actions. Even the god of the gorse did nothing, but froze in anticipation. And already at that moment, with renewed strength and water magic, Feria attacked all the dragons that blocked her path. All these dragons were enveloped by the magic of water, and no one had time to do anything. Feria acted quickly and deftly and dealt with them in the blink of an eye. Although after that she didn't look so happy, but on the contrary, her face expressed annoyance. She put away her sword, but when she got up, she staggered. The goddess Nyx rushed to her aid and managed to catch Feria without letting her fall. The dragon god chuckled and said that she was so capable, it turns out. But it looks like her powers have already run out. So now it's definitely over. But Feria said no, it's not over yet. The dragon god was surprised and asked what. And then the goddess Nyx looked at the dragon god and was very surprised and happy about something at the same time. Feria also looked there and smiled, as if she knew that this would happen. Ryuji came to their aid, who jumped on top of the dragon god in order to strike. Ryuji finally came to their aid and attacked the dragon god from above. Since the dragon god did not expect this, Ryuji managed to stab him with his knife and the dragon howled in pain. Ryuji finally landed on the ground and Feria immediately ran to him along with the goddess Nyx. Ryuji turned around to look at them. Feria stopped by him and the vacationer said that she was very glad that he was alive. Goddess Nyx was also very happy to see him and even started crying. Ryuji smiled at them and said yes, and turning to Feria, he said that she was also a great fellow. But Feria said no. She recalled again the words of Ryuji, who asked her if she didn't think she was the best at water magic. And I told him now that it was all thanks to his instructions. The goddess Nyx intervened in their conversation and, thinking, asked what it was, how could he survive? He got hit pretty hard, didn't he? But it really was like that. Then he blocked the blow of the dragon god's tail with his hand, and he flew away a long enough distance. But now Ryuji told them how he managed to escape. He said that before he got under the tail, he covered his whole body with magic in order to protect himself. Feria nodded approvingly and said that she understood. Hearing this, Goddess Nyx was surprised. She looked at Feria and asked if she really already knew about it. Feria told her that yes, she had already guessed it. Goddess Nyx collapsed to the ground and shouted that, why didn't she tell her anything? But their conversation was interrupted by the dragon god. Ryuji immediately turned to him. The dragon god was angry either at himself or at them and asked if some people really dared to hurt him. And he shouted that he would not forgive them. He growled so deafeningly that the goddess Nyx even covered her ears and started screaming too. Here Ryuji commanded the girls that both of them stayed here, and he will deal with it himself. Hearing this, the dragon god chuckled and said that what nonsense. After all, he will no longer be able to lure him by surprise. Ryuji agreed with him and said yes. He used his magic again and said that so he would just go ahead. After which, wasting time on unnecessary conversations, Ryuji immediately rushed into battle. While he rushed off to the dragon god, he noticed the smallest details. And I thought that's what he thought. This monster was not going to direct the rays at the altar. He directed only his breath towards them. So what can be done from this? The conclusion that the sacred artifact must be very important to him. Here Ryuji stopped abruptly and thought that yes, and besides, he is the same as all monsters. He takes normal damage from physical attacks, so he decided to use these ones. While he was developing his plan, the dragon god lost all patience, and I told him that why was he always jumping back and forth. Ryuji, using his magic again, accelerated his run several times. Therefore, he moved unnoticed by the dragon god. Oh, the dragon god couldn't keep track of him in any way. And then Ryuji stopped abruptly and took something out of his pockets. He waved his hands and a lot of gold coins scattered. Backpacks did this during her jump so that these coins fell directly on the dragon god. Everyone froze in anticipation of further actions. Feria was very surprised and said that it was the same. But I couldn't finish. The goddess Nyx picked her up and said that it was a magical force that made the weapon summoning coins float around. Ryuji said that he was starting to get used to working with magic power, so now he's capable of that. After which, all the gold coins that he threw away began to crack. They all crumbled into small pieces and a lot of anti-tank weapons appeared. Ryuji didn't mince words, as he wanted to deal with this dragon god once and for all. These were anti-tank guns with a caliber of 12.7 millimeters, PGHECAT2, and Ryuji created as many as 300 of them. The dragon god was just in a rage and said yes, how dare he? Yes, how can a person go against God? But Ryuji didn't think of backing down. So, taking the anti-tank gun in his hands, he told him that I'm sorry, but in his world it is customary to say that God is dead. Then he took good aim and pulled the trigger. The 300 anti-tank guns he created did the same. The dragon god couldn't say anything more, as he shot from all sides, and when all the cartridges ran out, a lot of dust rose again. Everyone froze in anticipation. Both girls looked at all this and were very surprised. Even the goddess Nyx opened her mouth in surprise, and Ryuji came down to earth again and decided to approach the dragon god in order to make sure of his death. All the remaining dragons that obeyed their god howled. They were rushing in different directions, not knowing what to do next. The dragon god wasn't dead yet, but he was barely holding on. He barely said to Ryuji that he would definitely regret it. He will regret not following them. Ryuji turned his back on him, said he would regret it or not. It's up to him to decide. He looked at Feria and the goddess, who were looking at him with admiration and waiting for him, and unconsciously smiled at them. And then they went to meet each other. The goddess Nyx was carrying something big over her head. She happily said that, and here he is. Walking up to Ryuji, she handed it to him. He took it in his hand and lifted it up. Feria came up to him from behind and said that it was because it was a sacred artifact of the dragon god's dungeon, or the mystical sword Liesel. But when the three of them already thought that all the hardships were over, then a familiar voice rang out. Ryuji, along with Feria and the goddess Nyx, began to look around. They realized that they were surrounded by the royal army. It was the same army that first entered this dungeon through the main entrance. However, Ryuji and the girl were sure that they were all dead. Apparently, they were just waiting for the moment when someone would defeat the dragon god for them. And when that happened, they came out to take the artifact for themselves. Their commander, seeing the artifact in Ryuji's hands, praised them and said that it was a great job. He takes off his helmet, said that, and now he has to give it to him. Ryuji, Feria, and the goddess Nyx turned their backs to each other in order to repel any attack. Feria immediately reached for her sword and said that these were the surviving soldiers of the kingdom of Naxos. Ryuji asked that they were just hiding all this time, wasn't it? The commander of this army did not even deny it and said that everything was exactly like that. He hoped that they would become bait, and at that time they would find a gap and escape. However, he could not have imagined that he would defeat the dragon god, and it played into their hands very much. He stretched out his hand and said that, so now he has to give him the mystical Liesel sword. Hearing this, goddess Nyx laughed very loudly and said that yes, he was just an idiot. The commander made a displeased grimace and asked, what else is it? Why? Goddess Nyx asked him that at times the winner is not the one who defeated Fafnir's dragon blog, is it not? The commander has already started to get angry and with the window tongue. Then the soldiers turned to him and asked him what they would do. The commander shouted that they should not try to retreat. They had just fought with the dragon god, so they shouldn't have the strength, and he ordered his army to seize them. So his army immediately went on the offensive. Ryuji tensed up and thought, well, that's it. He's really tired now. However, it is still easy for him to move, so he continued to deftly dodge all the swings of these soldiers' swords. And not that he deftly dodged, but also managed to neutralize them. However, the royal army was not going to retreat either. Seeing how he dealt with one of the knights, they rushed to him and asked how dare he. And even the two of them couldn't resist Ryuji. Ryuji thought that their actions had not been coordinated before. Even without his knife, he easily defused them all. He dealt with these two soldiers and another seed ran to him from behind. But Ryuji noticed him too and kicked him in the stomach. Even though this guy was wearing iron armor, the impact was very strong. After that, the man fell to the ground. He scattered all the knights of the royal army in the blink of an eye. And at the same time, he wasn't even tired, despite the fact that he had recently slain the dragon god. Now the commander of this army has noticeably strained. But apparently he wasn't going to admit defeat anyway. He thought what fools they were. Their best troops didn't even have time to use their magic, did they? While the commander was thinking about all this, Ryuji had already rushed over and stood beside him. He asked what they would do next. The commander was scared and asked what. Ryuji repeated his question and asked that they would fight too, wouldn't they? The commander did not know what to say to him, so he decided to look around, and his gaze fell directly on the surname. He thought that was it. Now Feria was concerned about the condition of the goddess Nyx, so after looking at her, she asked if she was safe. Goddess Nyx just laughed happily. Seeing Feria, the army commander grinned. He approached her brazenly and asked her that she was not the daughter of Count Merabit, was she? This dungeon is located on the lands of His Majesty King Naxos. Did they really think she would cause trouble just by walking around here without permission? Feria objected to him and said how convenient it was. Weren't they the first to betray his trust? They poured a gang of robbers, and about them, they were hired to explore the legendary dungeons of the Count's domain. The army commander tensed and thought, does she really know all this? This is a real problem. She needs to be careful with her. So he decided to pretend that he didn't know anything and said that he didn't understand what it was about. But Feria understood everything perfectly and told him to stop fooling around. Then the commander decided to change tactics and went on the attack. He told her that she had no proof of it. But as for her, both he and his army saw everything with their own eyes. In this case, who will His Majesty believe? Then the goddess Nyx couldn't stand it anymore and jumped in and said what a scoundrel he was. Ryuji was still silent. The commander felt up above them, and so he said that and so they should give him the mystical lethal sword. But then that mysterious girl showed up and said there was no need. The goddess Nyx, frightened by the sudden appearance, immediately recoiled to the side closer to Feria. The army commander asked her who she was. Then even Ryuji was surprised and thought that when did she have time? In her hands, this girl was holding some kind of black ball. This black ball was emitting some strange smoke. Inhaling it, the army commander started coughing. The girl herself ran away and told Ryuji and his companions that they needed to come here. After some time, the four of them all came out of this dungeon. They were back in the forest. This girl looked around and asked what, and where is the other one? Apparently, she was referring to the goddess Nyx. Goddess Nyx has once again assumed the incarnation of a virtual assistant. She said that she came out of the dungeon, so she can no longer be in material form. Ryuji scratched his head and, turning to this girl, said that it was all very difficult to explain to him. But she should not worry about her. The girl did not argue with him and said that it was okay. Feria was surprised by this answer and asked if she really just agreed with it. The girl is only questioning. She looked at her. After that, Ryuji decided to immediately ask her who is she? Hadn't she attacked them earlier? He remembered the time when someone tried to hit them with arrows in the forest. The girl said yes, it was her, and they apologized for what happened. Feria said that she was too simple. Ryuji was also shocked and told her not to talk. The girl took off her hood and said that in short, she wanted them to save His Majesty King Naxos. Ryuji clarified by asking that she wants them to save the king, right? Feria asked what it meant. After that, he told us that His Majesty had hired the dungeon robbers and thus betrayed them. But this girl interrupted her and said that it was not so. A traitor is exactly the commander of the army. Ryuji asked her to tell him more about it. Then the girl began to tell them everything. She said that the commander pretended to be ill and locked His Majesty up. And he did all this under the guise of His Majesty's order, and he was acting in his own interests. I'll dry it all, Feria said, which means so. And the illegal exploration of the legendary cave, and the attack on them. This is all the work of that commander, isn't it? Ryuji said that everything was clear to him now. Then now everything falls into place. Feria asked him what he meant. Ryuji asked if she remembered his words. Then the commander of this army brazenly told her that she had no proof of this, but about her, both he and his army saw everything with their own eyes. So, which one of them will His Highness believe? Ryuji said that was the only thing he didn't have any proof either. In fact, it just didn't matter to him who the king would eventually believe. They would be the criminals in any case. Feria thought about it and said that it was understandable. Then Ryuji turned to this girl again and said that he had one question. The girl asked him what is it. Ryuji said that the army already had the sacred key. Then why hire a gang of robbers to explore the legendary dungeon? The girl said that firstly they did not have a key, and secondly, they received the key to the royal treasury. Ryuji said that not a very pleasant situation. Faria looked at him in surprise and asked why. Ryuji said they were seizing control of the royal court, and in time, the king will be in danger, and he himself thought that in other words, they were staging a coup d'etat. No matter what the world is, people are still doing the same thing. Faria said that then they need to save him as soon as possible. Ryuji said that he still needs to check something. The girl looked at him questioningly. Then Ryuji took out this artifact that they had taken out of the dungeon and asked her what would happen to this sword. He does not have permission from the state to explore the mythical dungeon. Then the girl told him that the loot in the dungeon belongs to the one who earned it. She has received His Majesty's permission to study. Here's what she can say to that. Ryuji said it was fine. He will help save the king. Meanwhile, in the kingdom of Naxos itself, the capital, the imperial palace, the main gate, it was night now, so the army was everywhere. Then Faria came running and shouted that there was trouble. One of the knights asked who she was. The other one told her to stop. Faria stopped and, catching her breath, said that she was Faria, the daughter of Count Marabat. She apologized to them for coming so close to the capital. But there's a whole group of demons behind the castle right now. The knights froze for a moment, then asked if she was lying to them. Faria said no, she didn't. But then the knights looked at each other and saw smoke in the distance. Faria asked them to send their troops there as soon as possible. The knights, apparently, were frightened themselves and said that they were obeying. And the girl herself thought that she was not sure of her acting skills. However, he is confident that it will work, isn't it? Meanwhile, the smoke they saw was not a real fire. It was a backpack that used its gold coins to create a grenade and throw them in one place. He did it in order to break through the wall and go inside the kingdom. And in the end he did it. At that moment, two of these knights came running there. They asked, where did these explosions come from? The other one, who was running after him, said that it definitely wasn't magic, and pointed his finger to the side and told him to look there, to which his friend replied that he understood. Meanwhile, Ryuji and this girl were hidden behind a tree. They were watching the whole situation. Ryuji said that this should weaken the protection. The girl thought about it and thought that it was just an amazing magic explosion. Or rather, magical tools, isn't it? Ryuji looked at her and saw her confusion on her face and asked what it was. The girl said it was nothing. Ryuji came out from behind the tree and said that then they should go. The girl followed him and said she understood. She walked behind him and looked at him carefully. She thought how interesting. While these two knights were distracted, the two of them sneaked inside. They stopped behind the wall to rest, and Ryuji asked the girl, where is the king locked up? The girl said that on the top floor of the east tower. Now she was walking in front and told him to follow her. They're coming here now. Meanwhile, the imperial court, the eastern tower. Now we also had lookouts. The girl looked out from behind the wall and said that this was the only entrance. Ryuji sighed and said that it was clear, apparently there was nothing they could do. He decided to distract one of these soldiers and told him to come here for a minute. The soldier asked, what is it? But before he could turn around, Ryuji had already grabbed him. The man tried to escape, but could not. Then he fell to the ground. I heard it, noticed another knight and ran to help. But Ryuji had already managed to escape. The man began to look around and asked what they were. She didn't have time to say anything as he was attacked by Ryuji. Now the entrance was free, so they started climbing the stairs without any problems. Here Ryuji stopped and asked what was up, didn't he? Now the girl was running behind him and said yes. But their plan was sold to the commander. He was ahead of them and stood in front. He said he knew they would come here, and now they must not move from their place. It is dangerous for him to approach them, so they will decide everything at such a distance. The girl asked what was going on. She doesn't think he's going to make it. The commander raised his hand up and asked if she was really sure of that. He signaled, and an army surrounded them. Ryuji looked at all these knights and said that it meant it was a trap he had lured them into. The commander said that everything is exactly like that. And now what will they do? All the knights were armed. Each of them had a bow and arrows that were on fire. The commander told Ryuji that all these guys are very good magic archers. As soon as an arrow hits them, it will immediately flare up. They shouldn't be stupid and just have to surrender to him now. And they should also give him the mystical sword Liesel. Ryuji didn't know what to say to that. He thought that, although they are not such a huge number. However, then the girl told him that she had one request for him. Ryuji then said that he was listening to her. The girl asked him that she wanted the soldiers of the royal court to live as long as possible. Many of them don't even know what their commander is up to. And now Ryuji thought that if they can't be killed, then there's only one thing left for him. He picked up this girl in his arms and chased after her. The commanders swore and shouted that what a waste of time. And he ordered all his knights to fire. Everyone fired arrows on command. but none of them hit the target. Ryuuji jumped so that both of them were behind the commander. So now he took this commander hostage and holding a knife to his throat, said that no one should move, and also asked them all to put down their weapons. Everyone obeyed him naturally. Ryuuji said that setting up an unnecessary ambush was a gross mistake, and now they will go. But then one knight shouted for them to wait. He asked them to release their commander. Ryuuji told him that he was going to rescue the king, who was now being held captive by their commander. The knights were surprised by this statement and asked what. Ryuuji told them that even if they knew about it and launched an attack, they would be treated as traitors to the motherland, and they would not wash away this shame in any way. And I asked them, well, what? After listening to him, all the knights, without exception, laid down their weapons. Commander Iron was angry and shouted that they were idiots. The girl told him to give up already. His plan has already failed. The commander understood this well, but he did not want to believe it. After all this, the king was finally released, and also the chaos in the kingdom of Naxos has subsided. The investigation into the traitors will continue for some time. At night, now he thinks he's completely safe. Then the goddess Nyx came to life, who told him that a great job. Right now, Ryuuji was already at the manor and resting in his bed. Goddess Nyx told him that she was amazed, but it looks like he will really overcome the 10 pillars pretty quickly. Ryuuji asked, what are the 10 pillars? Goddess Nyx said that these are 10 gods who rule in mythical dungeons, and Fafnir was one of them. Ryuuji got up from the bed, told her that he understood. It turns out that she planned to exterminate them all. Goddess Nyx was shocked by this judgment and asked him what. Why does he think so? Ryuuji calmly told her that he could roughly guess from her attitude. That's why she brought him into this world, in order to use the power of another world to defeat the gods. Goddess Nyx was a little scared and asked that he didn't like being used, did he? But then how? But Ryuuji interrupted her and said no, he doesn't care. After all, he was originally just a military man. He lay down on the bed again and said it didn't matter who he had to deal with. In order to return to another world for the sake of the mission, for the sake of his comrades, he will kill these gods. The next day has already arrived. Everyone looked very smart, and even Ryuuji was changed. Then Feria came to him in a beautiful dress and said that it suits him very well. Ryuuji was dressed up in a beautiful and strict suit. He asked her if she was sure about it. He straightened his tie and said he wasn't very good at dressing like that. Feria told him that it was impossible otherwise. It's in honor of His Majesty's recovery. You can't come to such an event untidy. Then Mer came to them and said that they were quite noisy. He congratulated Ryuuji on receiving the status of an A-rank adventurer. His application was approved, so now he will be able to travel freely to different parts of the continent and back. It will also make it easier to conquer mythical dungeons. Ryuuji bowed to him and thanked him. The mayor was surprised and asked what for what. He had protected their lands, and he even saved His Majesty. Not enough gratitude on his part. After that, the feast began. There were a lot of guests at this celebration. Feria asked if no one had prepared a special award for Ryuuji at all. After all, he saved His Majesty the King. Ryuuji said that the fact that the king was in captivity should be kept secret, so there's nothing you can do about it. Feria wanted to say something else, but then everyone started dancing. So Ryuuji decided to ask her to dance. Feria was confused and asked that he was bad, right? In such events, isn't it? Ryuuji said it wasn't that much. He held out his hand to her and asked what maybe they would try. Feria looked at him and said yes. Then she took his hand, and then they started dancing. Everyone began to watch them. Someone said that I wonder where he came from. What a handsome man he is. Feria told him that it turns out he can dance. Ryuuji said that he once studied it, and he thought that in the past world he had not had a chance to apply his knowledge. But it seems that they will be useful to him here. A man came up to them and asked for forgiveness for interrupting them. He turned to Feria and Ryuuji, and he told them that His Majesty the King was calling them. The butler took Ryuuji and Feria with him. When they were already at the door, the butler knocked and told His Majesty that he had brought them. His Majesty told them to come in. When the three of them entered, they saw His Majesty sitting on a chair, and next to him was the same girl who asked them to help save the king. His Majesty thanked Ryuuji and Feria for coming. He also allowed them to be less formal, and asked them to sit down. After that, the three of them sat down at a table in a spacious hall. Ryuuji and Feria were sitting next to each other, and opposite them sat the king, next to whom that girl was standing. His Majesty said that first he would like to thank them for saving him and his country, and he would like to reward them with something. So if they want something, they have to tell him. Feria said without hesitation that she didn't need anything. They were just doing their chivalrous duty. His Majesty listened to her and said that in that case, he would grant new lands to Count Marabat. After all, sooner or later they would still belong to them. Feria was very happy and said it was a great honor for them. Her father will be glad of it. Now His Majesty turned to Ryuji and asked what about him. Ryuji said it was nothing. He was just doing what was required of him during the task. He doesn't need a reward. Feria was surprised and asked him that how could he say that. His Majesty laughed and told them not to worry. He turned to Ryuji again and said that, but he had saved the king. Therefore, it will be very strange to ignore such a feat. He can ask for anything, really nothing at all. Ryuji thought about it and said that then, and asked what about a carriage in order to safely transport Liesel's mystical sword. Feria also thought about it now and said that for sure. After all, the truth is, it will be problematic to travel and transport it. His Majesty said he had something for them then, and he turned to the butler, who was told to bring a circle of objects. Feria was very surprised by this and asked, "What is the circle of objects?" Ryuji asked her what it was. Then Feria explained to him that it was an S-class magic item, and especially rare are the inventories that belong to a country or guild. Feria explained everything to him so loudly and joyfully that she probably even forgot where she was now. Ryuji asked her to calm down and asked what inventory. After some time, the butler brought them this thing and put it right in front of them on the table. Ryuji looked carefully and asked, "What is this circle of objects?" Feria told him to try to put it in his pocket and stretch out his right hand. Ryuji did as Feria told him. He put this thing in his pocket and stretched out his right hand, after which he asked, "What's wrong?" Feria said it was a magical device that could store objects in another space. It automatically organizes and retrieves the necessary items. Ryuji's panel had just appeared in front of him. He said it was really very convenient, and I thanked His Majesty for it. His Majesty said that he usually just lies in the treasury, so let him put it to good use. And then I asked them what they were going to do next. Feria and Ryuji exchanged glances. One said Feria and said they were planning to go to the nearest mythical dungeon, since they intend to clear the giant god's dungeon. His Majesty said that the mythical dungeon in the elven village means there is a giant named Grendel in this dungeon. He guards a secret treasure called the Holy Water of Cain. This is a mythical level 2 dungeon. His Majesty called out to Sasha. That was the name of the girl who was standing next to them, helping Ryuji and Feria. He asked her to take them there. He is sure that the long service has exhausted her, so let him relax and rest in his native village. Sasha was very grateful to him for this and bowed. After that, she turned to Ryuji and Feria and said that she would take them to the giant god's dungeon. Ryuji and Feria responded at the same time. After all this, without wasting any time, they immediately headed to this mythical dungeon. The three of them were already sitting in the carriage. Feria asked Sasha what is her native village. Sasha said that there is a lot of greenery there, and there are a lot of animals. Feria smiled and said what a beauty it was. She is looking forward to this arrival with impatience. Ryuji turned to Sasha and asked if he could ask her another question. Sasha looked at him and said yes. Ryuji asked that who are the elves. The goddess Nyx even responded to this question and asked if he didn't even know that. Aren't there elves in manga or video games in his world? Ryuji said that he had already said that he didn't know that, and I thought that she was, as always, very noisy. Then Feria and Sasha began to explain to him together who the elves were. They told him that elves live a long time and they have elongated ears, and they are also very good at archery and magic, and they live in the forest. While they were discussing all this with Nova, all their characteristics were highlighted. One characteristics were highlighted in Ryuji. His name, everything was the same. Once a satire man. Profession, soldier. His level was already 48. Skills, level 80 melee and level 23 magic control. His health was 869 because of 870. Mana was 198 out of 200. His condition was normal, and he also had such yawns as Adventurer class, Conqueror of the Legendary Dungeon, Conquerors of the Mythical Dungeon, Destroyer of the Dragon God. The following characteristics were highlighted in Feria. Her race was also human. Her profession is an adventurer, swordsman. Her level was 43. Her skill was level 40 fencing. And there was also level 18 fire magic and level 30 water magic. The following characteristics were highlighted in Sasha. Her name was Sasha. The race is an elf. Profession, spy. Her level was 34. Skills, level 59 archery, level 56 fire magic and level 43 air magic. The goddess Nyx only had a known name and race. Her name was Nyx, and her race was God. Goddess Nyx was upset and said that only she was deprived of this. Meanwhile, everything was quiet in the elf village. Two elves sat on the ground and dealt with their weapons. But then they both heard something. One of them asked, "What is it?" They felt a slight shaking, and then they saw about huge monsters. They even had to look up to see him. They looked up and thought, what is it? Could it be that the giant had woken up? The giants really woke up and began to destroy everything in their path. The elves got scared and ran away, and the giant show right on their village allowed all the buildings in its path. This was the dungeon of the giant god. Meanwhile, Ryuuji, Feria and Sasha have already arrived at the elf forest. Sasha was walking in front, as she had introduced them. There was really a lot of greenery and a lot of different animals in this forest. Feria couldn't take her eyes off the surrounding nature. She said it was so beautiful here. Ryuji agreed with her. He, too, was looking at the whole area and thought that a whole half-month ride in a horse-drawn carriage from the kingdom of Naxos. Although the means of transportation are limited, it's a shame that the trip takes so much time. Then Feria noticed the changes in his face and asked what had happened to him. Ryuji said nothing. After a short silence, she said that there was a magic circle to move. Why didn't they use it? Feria said that it just takes a lot of magic to use it, and it is still very difficult to create it in an ordinary place. Ryuji looked ahead and said that he understood. At that moment Sasha stopped and told me that here she was. This is their elven capital. Most of their houses were located on a huge tree. Sasha said that their village is also called Sacred Tree Village. Then they began to climb the hill. Feria already knows, but she was exhausted and said that even though they could see her, they would have to go for a very long time. But there's such a steep slope here. Sasha turned to them and, apparently, was not tired at all and asked if they could rest a little. But Feria said no. Then the three of them heard some strange sounds. Everyone immediately stopped and pricked up their ears. Feria was already reaching for her sword, but then someone shot an arrow at them. It wasn't an ordinary arrow. She plunged into the tree with all her strength. Ryuji noticed it too and thought that it wasn't just an arrow shot, and shouted that who is here. But, of course, no one answered him, and the man who fired them immediately ran away. Ryuji noticed him and shouted at him to stop. Feria told Ryuji that his arrows were imbued with magic, so he had to be very careful. Ryuji understood that himself. After that, he himself used his magic and chased after this person at a very fast speed. Ryuji chased after him and thought that he was pretty fast, and even in such a small forest. Previously, he would have refused such a chase, but now, he had almost caught up with him, and then the man stood for a moment, turned to him and pulled the bowstring again, releasing 3 arrows at once. But Ryuji was moving at a very fast speed, so not a single arrow hurt him. Ryuji looked very puzzled and thought that after all, as his level increases, his physical skills also increase. And if you also add magic power, then he gathered all his remaining strength into a fist and chased after this man. In the blink of an eye, he caught up with him and grabbed him. This man was trying to get out of his tight grip and told Ryuji to let him go, calling him an idiot. Ryuji saw his face and said that he gave the same. But he did not have time to finish, as Sasha and Feria had already come running to him. Feria ran ahead, trying to get to Ryuji faster, and asked him if he was okay. But then Feria froze herself when she saw the face of their opponent. She asked if their opponent was a child. After some time, they reached the village of the Sacred Tree. Or rather, they immediately went to the elder. They brought to him the child who attacked them. The elder apologized to them. He said they shouldn't have addressed the guests like that. He looked at this child and told him to change too. This time, the child had no intention of apologizing to them. He said he was only protecting their village. It's just that the situation has been very unstable in recent days. Sasha was standing behind him and, grabbing him by the hair, told him to apologize. This child got angry and said that he understood. He would apologize now. He turned to Sasha and told her not to treat him like a child. After that, he approached Feria and Ryuji and, bowing to them, apologized. Ryuji looked more gloomy than a cloud and said that nothing, let him be better. And then I started teaching him and told him to better divide the attack into several attacks while moving. It will make it much harder to figure out where he is hiding now. Traps are also very useful if he wants to ambush uninvited guests. This child even pricked up his ears and listened to him very attentively. Feria was surprised and called out to him, asked what he was teaching the child. After that, Ryuji turned to the elder and said that, by the way, he had just said that the situation in recent days was not stable. Is something threatening the village? The elder said that, to be honest, the monsters from the dungeon. These monsters began to take over the forest. Feria immediately changed her face and said that here too. And Feria herself was thinking about something very much. She thought they were called the trolls of the city of Red. That is, such cases are spreading all over the continent, isn't it? The elder said that he would really like to destroy the core of the dungeon. However, Ryuji asked if there was something preventing this. The elder said that the entrance to the legendary dungeon is now broken, and you can't enter it. The dungeon really couldn't be entered. Apparently, when all these monsters raged, they blocked the entrance to the dungeon. Ryuji's goal right now was to clear all the children existing in this world's mythical level dungeon. Every mythical dungeon has legendary ones related to it. The keys are in them, and the village has legendary dungeons that are. Right now, the three of them are heading towards this dungeon, and saw everything with your own eyes. Feria carefully examined the entrance to the dungeon and said that yes, the passage was completely blocked. Even if they blow up, it is likely that another collapse will occur soon. Ryuji looked at Sasha and asked her why it was like this before. Sasha shook her head negatively and said that they could always come here safely. She had never seen anything like it before. Feria asked Ryuji what they would do. Ryuji calmly replied to her that they would first check if there was another entrance. The elder told them that the monsters from the dungeon were taking over the entire forest, which means there must be a gap somewhere. Then they heard a terrible roar. I asked Fair, what kind of sound is that? Sasha has already identified which way it is and pointing in that direction, said that he is from there. And then the very reason for this sound came to them. Feria was very shocked and said it just couldn't be. It's a crowd of cyclops. Sasha said it was very bad. They are heading to the sacred tree village. They have to stop them. After which, the three of them immediately rushed into battle. Feria had deftly wielded her sword and was now using her water magic to the fullest. Sasha shot all the cyclops with her bow, and Ryuji again used a gold coin and created a weapon for himself, from which he shot all the monsters, and at the same time sat on a tree. The whole team worked very cohesively, not missing a single monster. Then Ryuji ran out of bullets in his pistol. He threw away the weapon and jumped down from the tree himself. He rushed to the opponents and thought that he did not have enough coins to summon weapons, and there were still a lot of opponents. This is very sad, but he needs to find a knife now. Then the goddess Nyx spoke to him and told him to use the mystical sword Liesel. Ryuji asked, what is Liesel? This is a weapon that fell to him from the dragon god Fafnir. This is the thing that is needed to return to his world. While Ryuji was listening to all this, he deftly wielded his knife and killed all the cyclops. After listening to her to the end, he asked if it was possible to use it. The goddess Nyx said that nothing terrible would happen. The goddess Nyx explained to him that when he uses a sacred weapon, the amount of magic it possesses decreases. After a while it will be restored again. In other words, it is also a magic tool of the SSS class. Ryuji said that everything was clear to him, and he himself thought that, although he did not really understand why she was so enthusiastic about it. Then he used the thing that the king gave him and said that then he would try. He took out this mystical sword. The goddess Nyx told him that the sword would show an image of the magic that flows in it. Then Liesel's magic will be forced out by the sword, immediately activated. Ryuji took this sword in his two hands and, using his magic, he succeeded. After that, he decided to immediately try out this sword on the Cyclops, who was right next to him. This sword cut this Cyclops in half in the blink of an eye. And after that, Ryuji killed all the Cyclops that were in the area. Goddess Nyx did not speak immediately, as she was very impressed. And after all she could say, it's just awesome. It was really strong. Even Sasha was impressed and said that yes, it's the same. Feria asked him what kind of weapon from another world this time. Ryuji said no, but he did not have time to finish, as another Cyclops tried to attack him. So he went back to full combat readiness. However, he did not manage to strike one blow. Cyclops was faster and even suddenly attacked, so Ryuji only had to defend himself. He framed this sword so that the blow fell on him. But, apparently, the Cyclops had not a small force, so that even the crack of a sword could be heard. Goddess Nyx got scared, started screaming that no, it wasn't her fault. She really didn't know that such a weapon could crack. People were already barely holding on and thought, what should he do then? The girls will not be able to attack this Cyclops with their position. While he waits for them to move, the weapon may break completely. Cyclops was already pressing on this sword with both hands. The crackling was even stronger, but the weapon and Ryuji himself were still holding on. And then someone came to his aid. He took down this huge Cyclops with one swing of his sword. This savior possessed wind magic. Feria was very surprised and, looking in the direction from where the blow was struck, asked that it was fencing with wind magic, wasn't it? Who is? But then the dust settled, and they saw the one who struck this blow. It was a man in armor with short blonde hair, and he was also smiling at them very sweetly. Next to him was another man with red hair, who spoke to them. He asked if they wanted help in killing a couple of monsters. They will share the reward. On the other side of the armored knight was another man. He was very silent, and he was also dressed in all dark and with a hat on his head. These three men came down to them, and the guy in the armor said that they could help them with killing these monsters. Ryuji asked them who are they? The man was a little surprised and asked if he really didn't know them. The man in armor and the red-haired guy looked at each other and sighed. After that, the man in armor said that they were a triumvirate. Each of them has a system window with their information. The man in the armor is called Lar. The race is human. Profession, adventurer. He's level 85. He has skills such as swordsmanship level 51, fire magic level 21 and air magic level 71. The man with red hair is called Roy. His race is also a person and his profession is also an adventurer. He's level 77. He has skills such as level 35 fire magic and level 89 earth magic. Roy said he thought they were a little famous. And 3 guys named Malone. Since he also has a person and a profession, he is also an adventurer. He's level 74. There is such a skill as level 87 ice magic. When Feria heard their name, she immediately became interested and asked, "What is the triumvirate?" Ryuji asked her, "What, are they really that famous?" Feria said that this is one of the 3 largest adventurer teams on the continent. Leaders inherit legendary magic tools from generation to generation. For example, a Dragon's Fang. This is the largest team by number thanks to state support. There is also the Ouroboros Brigade. And there is also a group that consists of only 3 people and is able to match 2 such brigades. This is the triumvirate. Roy approached Feria and said that it was a great honor for them that such a lovely lady I knew so much. And I asked her how about a drink after the mission? Feria thanked him for this and said that she refused. Then Lars spoke up and said that, however, this assessment was somewhat exaggerated. They're not that strong. Ryuji put away his knife and said that okay, then. But Roy interrupted him and said that since they were also adventurers, there was something to discuss before work. He turned to Sasha and said that they would save the village of elves, and they then pay them some. Feria was very surprised by this statement and said that yes, how are they? But Sasha said it was okay. This is the right of every adventurer. Lars said he was glad they had reached an agreement so quickly, and he asked what and how much is she willing to pay. Sasha herself came up to them and whispered something in their ear. Then she pulled away and asked if that was enough. After that, Lar called out to his team and said that they needed to make all their efforts. Roy said that for Sasha the whole clan of elves. After which, all 3 of them immediately ran to execute the order. Feria was very curious about the amount Sasha offered them. So she came up to her and asked how much did she offer them at all. Sasha also began to whisper to her about it. After Feria heard that amount, she was surprised and asked her if she was sure about it. It's too much. Sasha said it was okay. After all, elves earn money in other countries, and precisely in order to avoid such cases, or for such cases, Feria guessed something and said that it was for this reason that she helped Emperor Naxos. Sasha said yes. Ryuji said that if they had agreed, then now they should decide on the roles. Lar said it wasn't difficult. Those monsters that will stay here, they will be on them. If someone, of course, stays. After that, the whole team started to complete the task. Roy was the first to act. Roy made a landslide. Then he called out to 2 of his comrades. Lar immediately took action. He swung his sword and killed several Cyclops already. Malone didn't lag behind either. He used his ice magic and froze several monsters. Feria, Ryuji and Sasha were just watching. Feria was really impressed by this and said it was just incredible. Sasha didn't even change at the Lyceum. She said that it looks like they won't get anything. Ryuji, who was standing behind them, thought that this was really a good deal. Their eloquence is very well honed. And there are such people in this world, too. Ryuji even smiled and thought that people who run such errands. Then he asked, "What is Mello's magic? What kind of magic is it?" Sasha told him that this magic is ice. This is a very special type of magic and rarely anyone can use it. Feria agreed with her and said that indeed, he may not be very noticeable, but it may well be that among the 3 of them he is the most capable. But then something went wrong. The ground under these 3 began to shake. Everyone lost their balance and started falling. Feria asked, "Is it really an earthquake?" Then the 3 came running to them. Lar told them that something had gone wrong, so they will have to retreat. So all 6 of them immediately rushed away from there. However, they understood that it was simply useless, because they would not be able to escape. The collapses were simply colossal. Lifted up, the ground just collapsed. So in the end they all fell. Feria was not at a loss and said that they would land thanks to the use of magic. Sasha picked up her bow and, pulling the string, said that it was good. Ryuji also agreed with her plan. So all 3 of them, using their magic, successfully landed down. Feria, having landed, exhaled and put away her sword. Ryuji asked the girls if they were safe. Feria and Sasha said yes. Then they heard the 3 of them. Lar said the ground collapsed and they fell too. But so much where? Sasha looked around and said that in the expanding underground forest of elves. This is a legendary dungeon. Roy turned to Lar and said he couldn't find Mello. Lar suggested that maybe he was hit by a landslide. Ryuji approached them and told them that they needed to find him first. Lar apologized, apparently felt guilty for not being able to save his comrade and now did not know where he was at all, and thereby added problems to everyone else. Feria asked what for what, but then some shaking started again. Sasha said it just couldn't be. Everyone looked up and froze in horror. Ryuji said that it turns out that their search will have to be postponed. A monster came to their soul. It was just gigantic in size, so everyone had to look up in order to see it. And he also had several heads that were positioned so that the monster could see what was happening from all sides. He also had a lot of hands, and the whole sight really looked very intimidating. Monsters growled so that his country splashed all sides. When he saw his enemies, he immediately rushed towards them. Lar was speechless for a moment, after which he asked, "What is it?" Ryuji hoped that Feria would be able to explain to him what was already happening, so he called out to her. To which Feria replied that she didn't know. It's the first time she's seen it, too. But Sasha knew the answer to his question. She said it was Hecatonair. This is the boss of this legendary dungeon. Roy asked, "What's the boss?" After all, they just came in here, and already in the final boss or something. Sasha told Ryuji to take care of himself. After all, But then Lar interrupted them. He heard some sounds behind him and, turning around, saw a whole army of Cyclops, which has no end or edge. So he said they were finished. Ryuji turned to Laru and thanked him for helping them out. Lar asked what? What is he talking about? He's probably just confusing something, because they're all going to die now. But Ryuji remained calm and said that both of them were all killing Cyclops, and they also have to give him coins of conscription weapons. Roy looked at him and asked what the coin of the summoning weapon was. But why would he need them? Feria understood him without further ado and had already rushed into battle and said that she understood him. Ryuji and Sasha were left alone with this monster. Ryuji studied it carefully and thought that it was a sandy magic aura. He feels that it will be very difficult. This monster began to swing his huge long arms, and he wanted to crush Ryuji, but he managed to bounce back. Sasha also remained very calm. Taking her bow in her hands, she pulled the string with 2 arrows at once. She took aim and endowed them with magic, fired directly at this monster. However, she failed to injure him. Ryuji carefully followed Sasha's attack and thought that he was repelling magic. So what then? After which, he reached for his knife and pulled it out, preparing to attack. At that moment, the monster swung its huge arm again and was about to hit him again. But Ryuji jumped back again. He stopped next to Sasha, who told him that Hecatonair is this dungeon, so he should be careful. Ryuji said he understood. So that's what she wanted to tell him then. After that, he asked her what and how can he be defeated. Sasha, without hesitation, said that it was necessary to destroy the core of the dungeon, which is located inside it. Namely, it is located inside on the backside of this monster. Meanwhile, those 3 were unable to cope with the Cyclops attack. Cyclops became more and more, their number did not even decrease. But still they continued to fight. Roy said they were screwed here. Feria asked Ryuji for forgiveness for not being able to keep them and thereby let him down. But their children are really too many, they displace them. Ryuji understood all this perfectly well, but he couldn't help but burst, either. He only thought that he was very worried about the physical strength of these 3. So they'll have to break through here first. He pinched a coin in his pocket and thought that he had only 1 gold coin left. So he shouldn't be greedy. He snatched it out and squeezed it in his hands, so that it fell apart into pieces. A weapon appeared in his hands. Defending themselves from the Cyclops, the 2 drew attention to his weapon, which appeared in his hands. Lar asked what kind of weapon it was. Roy said it didn't look like a staff. Feria also froze for a moment and turned her attention to the weapon that Ryuji is holding in his hands. She remembered the fight with the dragon god and thought that he had defeated the dragon god himself with this weapon. And this means that everything should work out for him. So without wasting any time, Ryuji took aim and started firing at this monster. He spent all his bullets on it. There was a lot of dust, so nothing could be seen. Everyone froze in anticipation. Lar was very surprised and said that this is power. Roy was also impressed and said that now they have definitely coped with this big reptile. But I told Feria that if he didn't answer, he was still alive, and shouted at them to run. Since the dust had risen, no one could see anything. So Lar did not see the huge paw that stretches right behind him. He didn't have time to move away, so the only thing left for him was to defend himself with his sword. But that didn't help him much either. The monster didn't even exert much force, but already pushed Lar away so much that he slammed into the wall. Roy was very worried about his friend and called out to him. But apparently, the monsters were very glad that he had succeeded. He eliminated one of them, so now he's targeting the rest. But then the final dust settled, so everyone could see this monster. But what they saw made them horrified. Faria said it just couldn't be. There is not a single wound on him from such a weapon. But Ryuji didn't seem surprised at all. Perhaps he even expected such an outcome. He just thought that's how it was. So he can also block magic with his aura. After all, his body is a dungeon. He is also very strong against physical attacks. So how can they defeat such a strong opponent? Apparently, now even Ryuji himself didn't know what to do in such a situation. He didn't even know what tactics to adopt in order to defeat this immortal opponent. He just turned to his comrades and shouted that he was coming. They must retreat. Roy looked back where the Cyclopes were already advancing and shouted to him that it was very easy to say. And I asked them what and how to do it. Now they were all surrounded on all sides. They had nowhere to go. Then the monster pulled all its paws in order to attack them. Sasha was the closest, and since she was impressed and terrified, she couldn't do anything. So it wasn't difficult for the monster to grab Sasha. After that, the monster pulled Sasha with him into some dark place. Apparently it was something like his haven. And then they disappeared into this darkness. Everything was so fast that no one even had time to do anything.